Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the February 3rd afternoon session of the Stafford Board of Supervisors. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Baumke? Here. Mr. Cavalier?
Here.
Mr. Milday?
Here.
Ms. Sellers? Here. Mr. Snellings?
Here.
Mr. Sterling? Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sterling has contacted me. He is running just a little bit late. We'll be here shortly. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Benson from the Superintendent of Schools, and I'm sure he's got some pearls of wisdom for us this afternoon.
No, I don't know. No pressure. But thank you, Chairman Snellings. I have four things, and I'll be brief, but four things I'd like to address this afternoon. One is a follow-up to a conversation that we had at a previous meeting regarding our teacher scale. I've put some additional information at your place, and I'll be addressing that in a minute. A little bit of a look ahead, a thank you that I want to share publicly, and an invitation. So let me start with a follow-up. We had some conversation when I was here last about whether or not we took into consideration the VRS pass-along related to teacher scale. And so we went back and did some adjustment to our projections and took that into consideration, and I've included that at your place this afternoon. The board saw it last month in January. So there were three school divisions that had not passed on all of the VRS, Loudoun, Prince William, and us. And so we've taken that into consideration and made some adjustments in what is sitting in front of you. And what you see is that if you remember that when we presented the information initially, we would have to get to 15 years of experience before we got above the median of the market. Making that adjustment, it would be 11 years, and we would be at the median of the market. So it does cause that line to shift a little bit. We are still, bringing forward an assumption-based model, and we have restated the assumptions on the first page of that handout that are kind of important in terms of trying to figure out where we want to get at in the future. And it is a moving target. I mean, that's part of the issue, is that the other divisions are doing things differently. We know that there at least three of the divisions at this point have formally said that they're going after some kind of adjustment in teacher compensation. So we realize that it's going to change a little bit for us. And part of us going after a market-based model is that we do want to be responsive to the market if we can. We also realize that revenue is going to be in flux, and so a model that's not predicated on a predetermined amount of revenue to move forward is also important. We are currently targeting the median of the market. The board could change that as a part of the budget work session, depending upon what revenue is available and where they might want to target those resources. Going after the median of the market, of course, from our perspective, lessens the impact of any individual school division in the comparison group, and again, acknowledging that that target may change in the future. For example, if what we really want to go after initially is the areas that we're most out of the market, then the top or the bottom quartile might be the place for us to go. So there's some flexibility there. We are assuming that divisions intended for teachers to be on that level to represent the number of years of service that they actually have in the division. We acknowledge that not everybody is there at this point, but we believe that was something that divisions intended. As such, there probably wouldn't be 30 steps or more. They might have 15 or 10 if they were not intending to advance folks a year for every year of service. The gaps are too big for us to close in a single year, and we're not trying to. The funding request that I presented to the school board, which they're going to wrestle with in the coming weeks, is aggressive in terms of trying to close the gap. But we acknowledge we're not going to be able to do that in a single year. There are some other variances that we have taken into consideration as an acknowledgement: the number of days in contract, some minor differences in stipends for advanced degrees and such. But we have that information. We know what the variance is, and we've taken that into consideration to the degree that we can. We're in the ballpark in most of those areas. And that in order for this to work, because we're really moving away from a very traditional step model, that we would have to do this kind of an analysis every year. And on some level, then we might be lagging behind the market because we would be doing the analysis every year. So we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that moving forward. The big thing that we think is very positive is that we have some level of support for teachers for what looks like a non-traditional step model. It's not a step model. We are recognizing years of experience, but we're not, essentially promising some incremental increase every year based upon number of years of service. And it certainly doesn't resonate with everyone. I'm not going to suggest that it does, but we do have some level of support at this point, including support from leadership in the Stafford Education Association. It is one piece of what we see as 5 key elements to recruiting and retaining high quality folks. Compensation being number 1, benefits being number 2, which we've talked a little bit about, work life being number 3, and that's an area that we have tried to assess how we're doing as a school division. We did climate surveying this year across all schools, across all departments. The board will be seeing the aggregate data from that analysis or survey at our meeting next week. And individual schools and departments have their information broken out, and they know what the division aggregate looks like, and they're working on plans to try and improve that. So we want folks to feel valued in the workplace, and that's an important part of that. Recognition, folks doing a great job. We want to recognize folks for doing that, whether it's Teacher of the Year, or Classified Employee of the Year, or just a note going to somebody saying, hey, we really appreciate what you did in this particular area, and we want to recognize that. And then finally, opportunities to grow professionally. And we've tried to restore a little bit of funding in the budget for next year for course reimbursement to get started, perhaps some additional substitute days, and some kind of per diem for our teachers that are new to the division when they come to the New Teacher Institute and spend some time with us, getting prepared to start their career with us in what we hope will be a long-term career, and that they don't leave us for a while. So with that, I just want to share that information with you. I'll be happy to try and respond to anything that board members might be wondering about at this point. And if not, I can go on to our look ahead.
Any questions for Dr. Benson on that subject? Proceed, Doctor. I'm sorry, Mr. Cavalier.
I was watching the local Washington news the other day, and I guess Fairfax County has a bit of a funding dilemma up there to the tune of $100 million for this fiscal year with their school system. And it was interesting to hear, what some of their issues were regarding their school budget. And the very first thing they brought up was starting teacher salary. Well, that's what a concern was for being addressed, and they wanted a certain percentage increase built into their budget, but just didn't know if you saw that. And I noted that they said the starting teacher salary at Fairfax is $47,000 per year, and they were worried that if they didn't get these increases this year, that they would lose their teachers to neighboring jurisdictions. So I guess everybody's in the same boat, right?
I think that's a shared concern. I would note that Fairfax is not one of our comparison divisions.
Well, I guess, and thank goodness they aren't.
So looking ahead, we are excited about the opportunity to work collaboratively as we move forward, not only through this budget process, but as we begin to get information coming from our shared services study. And as a part of that, next week we have our first budget work session for the board, and we're excited to have Mr. Snellings come to share a little bit about revenue projections, and that will provide a little bit of a platform for our board to get started in their dialogue about what they will want to do differently between what I've asked them to consider and what they ultimately bring to you all as their funding request. So we're looking forward to that very much, and I think that will be very helpful for our board to gain some insight as to what are the challenges that are facing the county, and how might that inform the work of the board as they begin to look at putting together their funding request. A thank you, which is the third thing that I wanted to do. I mentioned this at our last board meeting, but I want to again thank publicly Sheriff Jett for putting together really what was an outstanding professional development opportunity that took place on January 27th. We had an opportunity to bring together law enforcement, our SROs, and our building administrators in a professional development opportunity that focused on violence prevention and safety in the schools. and it was incredible. It really was an incredible experience to have us all in one place. It was very engaging. Useful information. I've gotten actually thank you notes from assistant principals that were in attendance that this is one of the more powerful professional growth opportunities that we have provided for our administrators, and to have our law enforcement partners right there and to have organized it, really an incredible collaboration. So I want to thank Sheriff Jett, and just we made it work, and we made it work on a day that we had a 2-hour delay. Because of weather, but it worked out. It worked out really well. And then finally, an invitation to each of you. I know that you all are involved in what's going on in our schools. Mr. Thomas was at Ferry Farm judging the science fair. That was last week? Yes, last week. Lots of opportunities to do that. I know Mr. Snellings is going to be at Hartwood tomorrow morning talking with staff. As part of what I'm trying to do in getting a deeper understanding of what classroom teaching and learning looks like, is spending time in individual classrooms across the division. I co-taught a chemistry class on Friday at Forge, spoke with a leadership class at Rodney Thompson. Many times I have school board members come along. There's something that's kind of interesting, I think, to be gained when you kind of immerse yourself in a classroom experience with a teacher who's just doing the normal thing that they would be doing with students during that class time. So I'd like to extend an invitation to each of you, if that's something that you would be interested in doing. We'd love to have you come along with me to spend some time in a classroom. We can try and pick a classroom that might be something of an interest to you. I don't know, maybe a programming class, Mr. Thomas, if that's something you'd be interested in. But kind of do that immersion experience. Would love to have you do that if that's something you'd be interested in doing. And like I said, I've been doing that with board members, and just would like to extend that invitation to all of you.
You don't expect us to teach or anything, do you?
Maybe.
Laura says she chooses recess. Any questions of Dr. Benson? Anything at all?
Just
Jack.
a comment. Just another old story here, but my uncle was the superintendent of schools in the district that I was in. So I would do this now that I don't have my kids in the schools here, because I remember I was mortified that he was in our classroom one day observing, and I didn't tell another kid in my whole class who that was. So.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Mr.
Benson.
Snellings.
We appreciate you. I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas.
You mentioned the science fair. I would just return that to you. When you show up and the superintendent's taking 4 hours out of their day, I know you had to leave because you have other things, but just the fact that you were there for the science fair, it says a lot to the community, and that's a big PTA-driven event. As you saw, there was probably 30 parents there. So
Incredible.
Thank you for the message that sends to the parents and the students there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benson. And I will see you next Tuesday evening.
Great.
Okay, presentations by the public. I do have one speaker card, Dana Brown. When you come forward, you have 3 minutes. The green light will come on. When it goes to yellow, you have about a minute left. And when it goes to red, it's time to wrap it up. Ms. Brown.
Hi, I won't need that long. I'm Dana Brown. I live at 41 St. William's Way, and I just wanted to thank you for nominating me last meeting for the BZA. I appreciate your confidence, and I wanted to let you know that Mr. Romanello's office has already sent everything over to the courts. The judge has signed everything, and I got sworn in by the clerk last week, and we'll be attending certification training next month. So just wanted to thank you again, and appreciate your confidence. Thank you.
Thank you for your willingness to serve. I don't have any more speaker cards, so I will start on my right. Anyone on my right that would like to speak? I don't see anybody from staff standing up because that's all that's over there. So I don't guess any of you want to talk. Anyone on my left? Anyone at all? With that said, we'll close the public presentations. Presentations and committee reports by board members. Clerk, would you call, please?
Mr. Milday?
Thank you. Since the last meeting, I've represented this board as chairman of FAMPO, where we spent pretty much the whole meeting trying to figure out the governor's new, the House and the governor's new plan for transportation funding. It's just it's unsettled for now. Community and economic development met right before this board meeting, We had it's a great agenda. I'll hit a few of the highlights. One of the problems we see was major site plans versus minor site plans in this county. The cost difference is staggering, a couple $1,000s worth versus $12,000 if you disturb over 2,500 square feet of land. And we're trying to find something somewhere in the middle, or a way to help some of these mostly nonprofits that's doing additions, churches and such, that really can't afford to pay that much, and also don't understand why the cost jumps up so drastically for a few extra feet. Looks like we're settling on a lease for the Medicine Wheel, the Patawamak Indians spot of land down at the end of Brook Road. You'll hear more on that. We talked about farmers markets. We had the Marine Corps in talking about REPI, which is a funding source for setting aside open space, but in this case, they are interested. The Marine Corps is interested to preserve their mission and stop encroachment on their base. So that was a healthy discussion. A couple other things about Falmouth, and I don't know if Anthony, you're going to share anything about the ISO report at some point. Do you want to just tell briefly how well we came out on that?
Yes, sir. Right now?
If you don't mind,
Be glad to. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, we did brief the board's Community and Economic Development Committee. Kerry Jameson, the county building official, briefed on the Insurance Services Office, or ISO, analysis of the county building official's office. We were scored a 4 for commercial as well as residential, which is a very good score. The lower the number, the better. A 1 is the best score you can get. 10 is the worst score you can get. We definitely moved up in all categories in the rankings from the last time that we were scored, and we're just on the edge in a few areas to move from a 4 to a 3. So Ms. Jameson and her staff are working on those efforts, training, certifications in particular, the kinds of things that would help us move that forward. Insurance companies who are looking at property insurance in the county definitely look at that ISO rating. Helps us from an economic development standpoint, and as well as a public safety standpoint. Chief Lockhart briefed the Public Safety Committee a few months ago on our ISO fire rating. That's a separate rating. Also some good news there, and just really good work by our folks in Public Works. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that. Thank you. A lot of us attended the Fredericksburg Chamber of Commerce's gala event, and it's just a great event. 440 people and a lot of businesses. It's kind of the movers and shakers of the Fredericksburg region. And lastly, there was an R board meeting. I'm sure you read about it in the paper, and there'll be another R board meeting on February 9th, a little kind of a hastily arranged meeting to try to get some clarification on the fees that are going to be charged at the landfill. I will be trying to reduce those as much as possible, down to 0 if I could, but it'll be better than it was in the last story. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Sellers?
Thank you. So it's been a busy week. Attended GWRC. They conducted their point in time study for the homeless population. That should come out in the next few weeks. And what that'll tell us is based on HUD's definition of homeless, which is different from the school's definition. So we should have that. And they're hoping it's lower. It was around 200 last year. So we'll have that hopefully the next meeting. Jail Authority met, and I'll tell you, for the first time in a year, it met for longer than 30 minutes. And interesting discussion. I had to take a look around and make sure I was in the right place. And there's going to be some policy changes that come out of the Jail Authority that just came out of the Operations Committee. So be expecting that based on an Attorney General ruling. So that'll be a little bit different. Legislative Committee has been interesting. So I'll do part of it, and then Meg's going to talk about the rest of it. Our transportation bill pretty much is dead, as I think we expected and anticipated. Senator Stewart carried our transportation bill, and he took quite a beating for it. So we've decided to abort that and give our senator a little bit of a break. Jail per diem. I can't remember jail per diem. Sorry, Anthony.
It's in the caboose bill in the governor's budget, so we hopefully will be okay on that.
Okay. And then the final one that's been coming up, kind of a package of bills that has to do with the mental health system, community mental health that we're watching. Senate Bill 1410 is the big one that pretty much CSBs throughout the entire Commonwealth is opposing. And I want to say we as a county, and Donna Krause is working on sort of our opinion on it. And essentially what Senator Deeds is asking is changing the qualifications of all pre-screeners who do involuntary hospitalizations, and it's going to cost quite a bit of money. So CSBs throughout the entire state have been vehemently opposed. The 8 years I've been in mental health, I've never seen this much opposition to a bill, so we're hoping it doesn't switch over, but that's all I have.
Mr. Thomas?
Differ.
Ms. Baumke?
Yes, I have a couple of things. First, on committees, I've been meeting with our OPEB staff on the OPEB earnings, and we've had a meeting in November and January, and our next meeting will be in April. But basically, when you look at our earnings, they are pretty much where they were last year in light of all the ups and downs in the stock market. It always seems to kind of flatten out. So for this year, this fiscal year, our earnings have been about $1,000 for OPEB. Last year, in all of 2014, we were at $1,700. The prior year, 2013, for the year, we were at $1,000. So we're already ahead of where we were the last 2 years. And in 2012, we were only at $870. So we're doing better. That's good. Next meeting will be in April if anybody would like to join us. On the bills that I was covering, the admissions tax bill, this was one that was in our legislative agenda, and that was pretty much a no-brainer, and we just needed the sunset date for that to be to 2019. That does not appear to be a problem. We do have an issue with the background checks that Chief Lockhart has been working very hard on with the Office of Emergency Management Services, because they're trying to mandate how they want background checks to be conducted, and we already conduct ours in such a way that we are way above the bar in the state. So he's been spending time down there trying to help craft that the way we'd like to see it crafted. So more to come on that. The cluster development, which is Bill 994, is not looking good. As we know, the homeowners or the Home Builders Association drives a lot down in Richmond, and they are not in favor of this bill where we wanted to have more contiguous open space. But it's not dead, but it's not looking good. The SB 995, which we are helping, that's the Standards of Learning bill, has made progress, and I know that Tim Baruti has been updating the school division on that. And let's see, the last one is the PDR program that Paul is near and dear to Paul. And that is also very much opposed by the Home Builders Association, but Jeff Harvey from our office is going to Richmond. In fact, I think he's there right now testifying on that. So hopefully we can get a little bit of good news out of there, or maybe some redirection. And that was it on legislative issues. I had two ribbon cuttings this past in the last 2 weeks. One was the Grill at Leland Station, which is a new restaurant. It's over at the intersection of Deacon Road and Leland Road. So really appreciate them moving into the community. And I think I mentioned this as at the previous meeting, but we actually had the ribbon cutting. So please go out to the Grill at Leland Station or Leland Junction and enjoy a meal. The last one was over here on Potomac Creek Drive. Service Master has moved to our area from Woodbridge, and a lot of these folks, they have 40 employees, are now closer to home. So they're all very excited to be getting off the hot lanes on 95. But anyway, welcome to them for joining our Stafford community. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Cavalier?
At today's Infrastructure Committee meeting, we discussed some transportation matters. First, among them, Telegraph Road safety evaluations that VDOT is doing right now and we plan to implement soon. Trustlow and Garrisonville Road, the PPTA road projects there. The Ferry Farm and Route 3 intersection improvements. And last but not least, the Mine Road sidewalk that is being proposed right now. Additionally, we also discussed the bids that were received on Woodstream Trail that would connect Woodstream neighborhood to Smith Lake Park. Some events that I attended. Last night I was at the Kate Waller Barrett Elementary School Family Fitness Night. That's a big event every year now. I think for the last 5 years, I think they've had that big turnout. Last week I attended Aquia Harbor Property Owners Association meeting, as well as the 350th anniversary committee's function at the Marine Corps Museum. That was very nice, and then also was amongst others up here down at the Chamber event in Fredericksburg. So that concludes my remarks.
Mr. Snellings?
I'll defer. Report of the county attorney
Defer any comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
and the county administrator.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'll take the county attorney's time. Thank you. Just a few
You've been
items.
talking with Ms. Baumke.
Just a few items, ladies and gentlemen. At this afternoon's Committee and Economic Development Committee meeting, Mr. Millie was reappointed chairman of that committee, and Mr. Cavalier, a little later in the afternoon, was appointed the chairman of the board's Infrastructure Committee. I would like to thank Dr. Benson and Jamie Porter and all of their staff. We're going to be partnering with Stafford County Public Schools this year on the St. Patrick's Day soccer tournament. That's a huge event that's going to be even better this year, both on county and school facilities, and we're all hoping for good, dry, warm weather on St. Patrick's Day. It's time to say hello and goodbye. Our new Public Works Director is here, Chris Rapp. He was here. There he is. Chris Rapp, who's coming to us from Powhatan County, and before there from Henrico County. He's a licensed professional engineer, started with us 7 days ago, and promises me he'll come back tomorrow. So we're glad to have Chris and look forward to the great things he's going to do with the Public Works team. And we're sad to say goodbye to Sarah Newland, who's there in the front, in our Department of Human Resources, who anybody who has health insurance in the county knows Sarah, and has done just an awesome job for us. She's gone from taking care of 997 people to taking care of 2, and that's Alyssa and Nathan. So this Saturday, Sarah will become unpaid and official a stay-at-home mom, and we thank Sarah for great service for 2 years with the county. So thank you, Sarah. We're absolutely going to miss you. Wanted to take 2 quick minutes with a vignette. As you're aware, ladies and gentlemen, our county employees are always doing awesome work in the county, and we adopted as our theme for this year Above and Beyond. And this very short video that we're going to show will give you a good example of some great work that's happening in a couple of our county agencies.
Take care of our community. They go above and beyond every day to ensure that Stafford County is a place where residents can live, work, and raise a family. Here are their stories.
Hi, my name is Sarah Kirkpatrick, and I'm an associate in the Department of Economic Development and Tourism. One of my main responsibilities is managing the social media for Stafford County government as well as my department. We use social media to inform citizens about closings, upcoming events, and things going on in the county that may affect them. In December, the 95 Express Lanes project came to a completion. This was very exciting because it created a new way to travel in Northern Virginia along the 95 corridor. However, there seemed to be a lot of confusion about how the 95 Express Lanes, specifically the tolling, was really going to work. Since one of the main entry and exit points of the 95 Express Lanes is in Stafford County, we wanted to make sure we informed citizens about how they would work. That's when I had the idea to create an information video explaining the tolling process for the 95 Express Lanes. Our department works very closely with the GIS department on creating different types of maps and informational materials for citizens, and so I contacted one of my coworkers in that department to create the video.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Nova. I'm a GIS analyst for Stafford County. When Sarah came to me about the Hotlines video, I was very excited. A lot of people don't really know what the GIS, or Geographic Information Systems Office, does, but we create all the data and we maintain all the data throughout the county. And we use that data to create different visual aids, such as maps and graphs. And more recently, we've been using that data to create more dynamic maps, such as web applications, videos, and 3D models. So when Sarah came to me about this video, I was very excited to show all of this data through new mediums, like this Hotlines video. With the video, we had 3D animation, we had multiple visual aids such as slides and maps and graphs, and we also had an audio recording of Kathy Bolbrick, the Director of Communications, explaining the Hotlines. This all resulted in a very informative and dynamic video that we were able to promote on social media platforms.
So when Jacqueline created the video about the 95 express lanes, it was very visually engaging, and I hoped that it would reach at least a couple hundred people. When I put it on the county government social media sites, within 24 hours, the video had reached over 3,000 people. As of today, the video has reached more than 5,000 people. This is very exciting for a lot of different reasons. For one, it was the first video project Jacqueline and I had collaborated on, and it seemed to be a success. But another reason, and the most important reason it was a very successful product, is because it reached Stafford County citizens and informed them about a significant change and told them how it would work.
So that's just one in what will be the beginning of a series of telling our story of the good things that we do. Sarah Kirkpatrick in Economic Development, Jacqueline Nova in Information Technology are here. Stand up, ladies. Great job. Two of our whiz kids here in county government. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, 2 agenda changes. One is to remove item number 7 from the consent agenda, and the second one is to add item number 21, County Administration discuss House Bill 1887, Transportation Funding Formula, Update Annual Reporting and Allocations. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to add those 2 items to the agenda?
So moved.
Second. All in favor, cast your votes. Tally the vote. Motion passes 7-0. 6-0. I'm sorry, 1 absent. Does any board member want to pull anything from consent?
Yes, I'd like to pull, I think it's item number 5, the sidewalk. I just want to have a small presentation for folks to see that, because I think it's pretty big project in North Stafford.
Anyone else? Do I have a motion for consent absent item 5?
So moved.
I have a second. Cast your votes. Tally the votes. Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absent.
Mr. Hubble, please, Mr. Chairman, can speak to item number 5.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Item number 5 is a request for the board to authorize the county administrator to approve a grant application for some transportation enhancement funding to construct a sidewalk up along Mine Road between High Point Boulevard and Cathedral Lane, and essentially there are some unallocated transportation funds that can be utilized only by Stafford County. We're looking to tap into those to begin the design of this project, which is rather complicated because of some constraints in that area. And however, it is a highly utilized thoroughfare for pedestrians, so we're excited about that opportunity. So we appreciate your support, and I'd be glad to answer any other questions that you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Hubble? Ms. Bonke?
I don't have any questions for Mr. Hubble, but I did ask at the committee meeting how long this project had been on the docket, and I think that's pretty important to know. It's been 10 years. So yay, they're getting their money.
Good point. Any other questions? Ms. Sellers?
I'd like to make the motion to approve.
Second.
Cast your ballot. Tally the vote. Motion passes 6-0 with one absent. I will abstain from item number 7, which is the condemnation of property on Truslow Road due to family connections, and I will turn the gavel over to Ms. Sellers.
Thank you, Mr. Snelling. Well, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? Cast your votes. Tally the votes. The motion passes 5-0 with one abstention and one absent.
Thank you very much. You've done that before, haven't you? Pretty good at that. Okay, let's move to item number 15, Finance and Budget, authorize FY 2014 school carryover funds reappropriation. Ms. Collins.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Nancy Collins in the Budget Office. The schools have requested reappropriation of their unspent FY14 funds for one-time capital uses. The request includes $500,000 toward the purchase of a new financial and HR/payroll system with a total cost over $2.6 million, with the rest of that project to be funded by debt. Because that has a tail of ongoing debt service and operating costs, in the superintendent's proposed budget, he has a cost of $370,000 for debt service and operating costs for that project. Because it has that tail, staff recommends that we pull that piece out and delay approval until a later date so that the board can consider it in the full context of the budget, and also after the shared services study is complete. So what we would do is fence off that $500,000 and have it available for school funds only in the future, at a future date. So we have talked to schools about our recommendation. They know that we're going to recommend this. Proposed resolution R1548 would increase the school's FY15 budget and appropriation by $1,678,000 and defer the approval of the $500,000 for the information system until a later date and fence off that money.
Any questions from Ms. Collins?
You said $1,678,000. Did you mean $1,778,000?
$1,768,000. Thank you. Excuse me.
Mr. Thomas.
We discussed this at Finance Audit and Budget, and when it first came to us, there weren't any details about the projects. They did provide in your packet there attachment number 4 detailing the $1.3 million worth of projects. And I believe the resolution is what we didn't say yes or no to this. We just wanted the full board to take it up. But what we did say was bring it to the board without the $500,000 there. We're not spending on anything else. It'll be sitting there for if and when we decide to move forward with a new system. So the money's not going anywhere. It'll be there when it's needed.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms. Sellers? No, that's fine. Ms. Baumke?
Yeah, I would just like to know if Dr. Benson could give the board just a brief update on where they looked at other systems. Have you explored the human resources package yet for this? Have you gotten that far in the process? Do you mind give us a little update?
We have. Actually, I'd like to defer to Mr. Wolf if that would be okay.
Oh, okay.
So I can turn that. Is that on my end here?
Good afternoon, members of the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Snellings and Ms. Sellers and Ms. Bumke. To answer your question, we have looked at other systems. This particular system that we've whittled our review down to is Tyler Technologies. They're one of the major vendors in the Commonwealth. We visited Alexandria that has Tyler Technologies. Within the last couple of years they implemented. We also went to and visited the Norfolk Public Schools as well, which I think they're a long-term user of Tyler Technologies. I believe 10 years ago they implemented. And there are some other school divisions in the area that were about to make a decision about going to Tyler Technologies. And so they have a high reputation, and one of the things about what we decided was that there was an already existing contract out there that we could ride, that Alexandria and Manassas and some of the other school divisions in the area that have implemented Tyler Technologies, it was still in force and still could be utilized. But we wanted to perform due diligence, do our site visits, have demonstrations provided to us by Tyler Technologies, which we had multiple presentations to all of our users, to Dr. Benson and school board members. And we satisfied ourselves that the needs of the school division were being met. This software package would include both a financial and a human resource and employee benefits applications that would meet many of the needs that we're meeting right now with standalone systems. We have many standalone systems for human resources, and what we'd really like to do is bring everything under one umbrella and have everything integrated and be able to use as much of the application's functionality as possible. We started the process of reviewing the procurement and reviewing functionality of software and looking at other vendors back in June of 2014, and we pretty much wrapped up our review in December this past year, before the holidays. And we have, as part of this process, have been working with outside legal counsel with regard to the lease purchase financing. So the total project cost is 2.6. We're proposing that we would use $500,000 from carry forward funds, which are now going to be deferred until the shared services study is completed, and the other $2.1 million would be financed through a lease purchase financing arrangement, and that would be subject to the Board of Supervisors approval as well. That's an overview of where we stand and some of the things that we've done. In the time that we have here, I've probably abbreviated things a little bit, but if there's more information that I can provide, any questions beyond this that you would like additional information on, we can provide whatever it is that you need.
No, that was helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move R15-48.
I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Cavalier. Cast your votes. Tally the vote. Motion passes 6-0 with one absent. Item number 16, Finance and Budget, authorize release of 2015 county and schools appropriation hold.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, item number 16 concerns the annual consideration of release of the appropriation hold. When the board adopts the budget every April, there's a 5% appropriation hold for both school and county operating funds. This is to ensure that as we move through the fiscal year, that our finances are in good order, and then after the mid-year review, the release is considered by the board. At the mid-year review, the board heard that the report of the details of the current year, and so this would release the full 5% for Stafford County Public Schools. It would release almost all of the 5% on the county side, with some identified savings of about $500,000. It's proposed resolution R15-36, and we recommend approval.
Any questions? Mr. Thomas.
I'd like to move for approval of R15-36.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Baumke seconded. Cast your votes. Tally the votes. Motion carries 6-0 with one absent. Item number 17, Human Resources. Consider the revised county sick leave policy.
Ms. Wagner, please.
I apologize, Shannon. Go ahead, please.
No apologies, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I want to spend just a minute talking about how we came up with the proposal that's before you today. The VRS initiated a hybrid retirement plan that became effective.
Excuse me, Shannon. Would you do me a favor and take that mic and pull a little bit closer to you? I don't think the public may be able to hear you.
Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. The Virginia retirement system on January 1st of 2014, the hybrid retirement plan through VRS became effective, and it affects all new employees hired on or after that date that had no previous or current VRS service, and then current employees had a one-time option to opt in to that program. This hybrid retirement plan combines a defined benefit with a defined contribution compared to the traditional defined benefit program that had been a part of VRS for since its inception. Employees have the ability to put additional resources into the defined contribution portion of this plan and receive an employer match. Another one of the differences compared to the traditional program is the inclusion of a short-term and long-term disability program. That program is paid for 100% by the county. The employees bear no expense to those benefits. The benefits under the short-term disability policy cover 60 to 100% of the employee's time while they are out on leave for an absence that's of their own serious illness or injury. It does not cover them for their family members' injuries or those kinds of things, but it does cover them for their own injuries and illnesses. Non-hybrid plan members do have access to a short-term disability policy. That policy is covered 100% at employee cost. So those are some of the highlights on the differences between hybrid versus non-hybrid. And with those differences, most importantly with the short-term disability benefits, the county decided to look strategically at our current leave benefits and decide whether or not where we're at today still makes sense going forward, if there needs to be any differentiation between those two groups of employees, or if the policy as a whole needs to be addressed. The leadership team began with a consultant through Wells Fargo to come in and give us their analysis of our current leave benefits policies, and we took their proposal, and a subcommittee of the leadership team reviewed that to have a full discussion with the leadership team. Once a draft proposal was put together, the leadership team gave those recommended changes to our employee advisory committee as well as to all employees to open for comment and suggestion. The extent of those comments are included in the background report that you're free to look through. We did take a couple of those items and add them to our original proposal, specifically to give part-time employees some holiday benefits and some sick leave benefits as of their date of hire. Currently, the employee has to wait 1 year as a part-time employee to get any of those two benefits. A summary of our proposal: initially, we would freeze all existing sick leave balances that are on the books today. That is in an effort so that we do not reduce the value of what employees have already earned. We didn't want to take any of that away, so we would freeze what employees have already earned and put it into a separate leave bank. That leave would still be available for use and for payout under our current policy and guidelines. It would be paid out at today's hourly rate, or the date the board should choose to adopt this proposal. So there would be a freeze on the increase in liability, so to speak, and then any new accruals from after the date of adoption would follow all of the guidelines under this policy and be in a separate leave bank. We would put a cap on the amount of the sick leave payout at 480 hours. Currently, yes, sir.
Could I ask a quick question going back to all sick leave accruals after the day of the policy adoption, payout of 25%? That's all current employees as well as future employees. Is that correct?
No, the frozen leave bank, the reserve bank, would be paid out at 25% with no cap, So for all current employees, there would be two groups of leave. There would be one bank that represents the leave on the books as of the date of the policy adoption. That would be paid out at 25% of whatever the balance may be, with no cap on the number of hours. Any leave accrued after that date for current employees and for future employees would be limited to 480 hours, 25% of 480 hours.
So our current employees, let's say I've been here 15 years and I've got 480 hours on the books and I want to retire tomorrow. What, under today's policy, what payout do I get? Do I get 25% of the 480 under today's policy?
You would get 25% of however many hours you had, whether that was 480 or
4,080.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's still 25% today and will be tomorrow.
The percentage wasn't changing, is not proposed to change at all. It's just that we would cap the.
Okay, so if I've got the 4,000 hours, I still get what was promised to me. I get 25% of that at the current rate. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. We made a few changes recommended changes to the amount of the leave accruals. For a non-hybrid employee, the only change that we made currently, based on years of service, once you hit 5 years of service, you move from 4 hours per pay period to 6 hours per pay period. Under our annual leave system, that shift from 4 to 6 hours occurs at the 4-year mark rather than the 5-year mark. Our proposal is just to move and marry those up the same, so that under sick leave, they would go from 4 hours accrual to 6 hours of accrual at the 4 year of service mark. Under the hybrid plan, we are recommending a 4 hour per pay period accrual with no increase based on years of service. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we would allow, based on the employee comments, we considered to allow part-time employees to begin earning sick leave and holiday pay as of date of hire rather than after 1 year of service. After taking this proposal to the Finance, Audit, and Budget Committee, one thought that came out of that committee, or one consideration they wanted us to look at, was what if we get grandfathered current employees and only applied this to future employees, and what would the impact be there? Essentially, the cost for that option would be to reduce and delay any savings realized by the policy in the short term. Essentially, what happens in the short term, the savings is going to be the fact that current hours from current employees are paid out at today's rate rather than at their hourly rate at the time of separation. So any pay increases achieved between the date of adoption and the date of separation, those hours accrued today would not increase in value, whereas if we grandfathered existing employees, those hours and that liability would have the opportunity to increase with the hourly rate. Since fiscal year 2010, the sick leave payout liability has grown on average 4.2% each year. That's through data taken from the county's CAFRs. And then the current accrued value, the total value of all sick leave hours today is $12.3 million. That would have the potential to grow to $13 million. And then since we pay out at a 25% rate, the sick leave payout liability could have the potential to go from $3 million to $3.3 million under the grandfathered option. This chart is just a fairly simple representation of what it would look like to grandfather one employee. This employee is an employee that makes approximately $50,000 per year, has approximately 480 hours of sick leave, and assumes the employee would get a 2% raise each year. The payout liability is represented at 25%, as our policy states, and it shows what that person's, the total value of their sick leave would be in 3 years, as well as their eligibility for payout over 3 years' time, if they were grandfathered or not. In the end, for one employee, it makes approximately a $700 difference in total value of sick leave, or approximately a $200 difference in possible payout. Those are all the slides I have for you today. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Wagner?
Mr. Chairman, if I may add to the presentation. Our proposal is that should the board be inclined to move forward with this, would be to make it effective July 1 of this year. We think it's important to, obviously, to notify employees. Folks are well aware that the board is considering this, but notify folks so that they can begin to adjust to the change, and also to change our financial or human resources system so that it can adjust to the new accruals.
I do have one question. Just for clarification, if I came to the county 15 years ago and I was in your office, you were explaining benefits, what is this a benefit that you would explain to me? Would you have told me that you can accrue sick leave time, and at the end of your career, whatever's left, you get 25%? Is that what employees are told, or?
I can't speak to 15 years
ago.
No.
Let's go today. Let's just say
today during orientation, we do talk about leave benefits. We do talk about most specifically about accruals, and we don't consistently mention the 25% payout, although we go over the policies and we often get questions on that fact.
But the employees are very well aware of the 25% payout.
Yes.
Okay.
We have been pretty clear with hybrid plan employees especially, and given that all of our orientations are usually a mix of hybrid and non-hybrid employees, we talk about that we do have leave benefits under review and that they could be up for change. We've been doing that for the last probably year and a half. Okay. But we do talk about leave, and we mention what the current accruals are, yes.
Thank you. Any other, Mr. Thomas?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We discussed this for a couple months now, I think, at Finance Audit Budget Committee, and it was our intention to get it to the board so we can really start thinking about what we're going to do here, because just the fact that this policy is up in the air, can cause consternation for employees. So, but as you can see on the thickness of the package that you read, there's a lot of changes in there, and since this is a new item, we can discuss more here. But I would hope that we might be able to defer it to the very next meeting, just so we all understand the major consequences in this policy change.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Mr. Miller?
What's the idea behind, what was your thinking behind including part-time employees immediately?
That was a request from some of our folks. Yes, well, it was. I mean, because it's a benefit that we provide, but they have to wait a year to get it. And the thought was the cost would be minimal, negligible, and that way, when they walk through the door, they're a county employee and they're treated the same as everybody else. That's really the thinking. It's a very minimal cost to do that, and things come up for folks in their first year of employment. We wanted them to be able to take care of their families or whatever they need to do.
Any other questions? I'll bring it back to the board. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Cavalier.
Yeah, not so much a question as a comment after deliberating with this in the committee. And I still do have some heartburn with not grandfathering in the current employees. I know that in the federal system, when the retirement system changed, it basically cut off at a date, and those that were in the system retained the same benefits for the rest of their career if they so chose. Now, they could go to the new system if they wanted to do that. We were given that option. But the fact of the matter is the cutoff only applied to those entering service after the enactment date of this. And so that's my difference. I know there's an increased cost to do this, but it does have an end to it in that you would only be including the current employees. So you have a finite number that you're dealing with at this point. It's not open-ended, which I know was the predicament that we were in, and it's hard to judge how much that would have been in future. But knowing exactly how many employees we have, and it cuts off at this date, and then the new system, which I think is good, would take effect for new employees after such and such a date and not affect current employees. Again, that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Mr. Cavalier. Any other questions?
I just might as well add a little bit
Thomas.
as well. A philosophic discussion that came up in committee is vacation balances. That's something that someone earns, and we all agree that has a financial value to it. But what's happened over time with the sick leave, which is really designed if you're sick, you take that. It's kind of like an insurance policy. You buy auto insurance or life insurance, hoping you'll never, ever, ever need it, but you're banking it up just in case. And you might get to the end of your career and, hey, I never really had, 3 weeks worth of sickness. So treating sick leave as differently than vacation, it's maybe not necessarily has a value to it. It's more of an insurance. That's kind of what led us down the path of, why this even came up in the first place. There wasn't a way to do disability. So that was a way for you to build up your own disability insurance policy. And that's why we let it happen. I mean, I think that was the main intention of why we crafted it in the first place, because there was no option to help people out if they had, a debilitating injury that caused them to be out for 6 weeks. This was a way for them to do that. But again, it's more of an insurance policy. You may or may not need it. So it's just something to keep in mind as we're deliberating.
Okay. Mr. Cavalier.
It's tough.
You never know when you might get hit by a truck.
Yes, Ms. Sellers.
It's kind of related to sick leave because it's maternity leave, but do we offer paternity leave in this county for our guys?
Yes, 12 weeks.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I didn't see it in. Yeah, some places offer the same amount of paternity. You can use your sick leave as paternity.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions before we take a motion? Is there a motion, Mr. Thomas?
Motion to defer to the next meeting.
Do I have a second? I'll just make one comment. I know this is a discussion point. I am in agreement with Mr. Cavalier. I believe if employees were promised something when they came to work here, we should honor those promises. I will certainly consider this in the next 2 weeks, in the next meeting, but I firmly believe that we made an obligation and we need to live up to that obligation. Any other comments? With that said, cast your vote for deferral. Tally the vote. Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absent. Item number 18, Public Safety Staffing Plan. Chief Lockhart, I've got you first out of the gates.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, the Public Safety Staffing Plan was developed over a year ago and has been in front of the Public Safety Committee for a number of sessions. The committee asked that the chief and the sheriff bring it forward, so they both have presentations. The package that you have is very detailed. We certainly don't request or expect board action today. The one thing I would say in teeing this up is that, as we've said to the committee all along, this plan is simply aspirational. It is something that we certainly recommend, but we understand that it's going to have to weather the realities of the county's fiscal situation, both now and in the future. And again, no decisions requested today, just simply an informational presentation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mark Lockhart, County Fire and EMS Chief, with you today to discuss our portion of the proposed public safety staffing plan. Thank you for the opportunity to present this to you today and discuss our challenges and staffing needs with you. In the next several minutes, we'll take a look at some of the questions that have been asked about our operations and look at some of the challenges that we face and the opportunities that we have explored. Before we do that, I have a brief 3-minute video clip to show you about fire behavior and fire spread. This video was done by the Reno, Nevada Fire Department to demonstrate the rate of fire spread in a typical living room. It was done in a test facility. I just want you to take a look at that. Marcia? You can see here in just a second, you'll see some flames appear there below the arm of the couch. This could be an improperly discarded cigarette in a trash can. It could be an electrical short and an extension cord. You've now got flame spread from the area of origin or the point of origin now. It's going to begin impinging on the arm of the couch as well as that chair next to it. We used to tell folks they would have about 10 minutes to exit a burning structure. With the construction methods these days, and particularly the things that are contained inside a home now, seat cushions, chairs, entertainment centers, things like that, you now have about 3 or 4 minutes to get out.
You notice that there's really not a whole lot of smoke production at this point, so your smoke detector wouldn't necessarily begin to activate. It's beginning to appear now. Flames have now approached the ceiling. You're starting to see some of the smoke roll over the ceiling. If there were a working smoke detector in this room, it would have gone off about this time, or if there's one in the hallway, it would be sounding. Flames are now rolling across the ceiling. You can see the smoke's actually banking down off of the ceiling. Papers on the coffee table are about to ignite. You want to keep your eye on that entertainment center there in the center of the screen. And at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, we've now had flash over the room. The contents of that room have reached the ignition temperature and have ignited. We began work on this staffing plan 2 years ago and looked at our current operations, including our deployment and staffing model, our response times, our call volume, and projected growth in the county. We spent a considerable amount of time compiling data and information for the plan, and it is important to bear in mind that this is a dynamic situation. We initially presented this plan to the Public Safety Committee in November of 2013. It was presented again in early 2014, and the discussions with the committee have been ongoing since that time. In those conversations, some questions have been asked that we believe should be presented to the full board, and that is where I would like to begin. We often talked about an 8-minute response time. 8 minutes or less, 90% of the time is the standard that we're shooting for. We have a response time goal for our emergency calls, and our most recent data shows that we currently meet that standard 70% of the time. The 8 minutes or less comes from national standards established by the National Fire Protection Association, the American Heart Association, and other national organizations and agencies, which show that both EMS and fire incidents can take a disastrous turn for the worse at 8 minutes. In cardiac arrest, brain damage is known to begin at 4 minutes without oxygen, and irreversible brain death begins at 8 minutes. On the fire side, there are 4 stages of fire progression: ignition, growth, fully developed, and decay. A flashover, the point at which the contents of the room heat up and then ignite, can occur quickly, as you saw in the video, at just 2 minutes and 30 seconds. If the living room you saw in that video were a real single-family home, it would have spread to the adjoining rooms, and after 8 minutes, most likely would have involved at least 3 additional rooms at that point. Now, to fight any fire, we need to assemble what's commonly referred to as an effective firefighting force. National Fire Protection Association standards address that issue in Standard 1710 and indicate that for a first alarm assignment for a 2,000 square foot, 2-story, single-family home without a basement or exposures, an effective firefighting force at a bare minimum should consist of 14 to 16 firefighters. Our daily staffing in Stafford County is 4 career staff fire apparatus at Aquia, Berea, Shelton Shop, and Mountain View stations. In addition to that, volunteer staff and engine at Falmouth Station and at Stafford Station between 70 and 90% of the time. We also have 6 career staff medic units at Falmouth, Stafford, Hartwood, White Oak, Potomac Hills, and Rock Hill. The operations deputy chief for the shift commander is based at headquarters at the Public Safety Building, and the operations battalion chief is based at Berea. Our total daily staffing is 34 to 46 people, depending on leave and volunteer staffing that day. Volunteer staffing has dropped somewhat over the last few years, most noticeably in 2014. Our 2 companies that staff more commonly are Falmouth and Stafford. In 2014, Company 1 staffing was down from the upper 90s to 89%. Stafford was down from the upper 80s to 71% for the year. Our daily manning on the career side, minimum manning is 27 people at this point. Now, just to take you through the anatomy of a fire call, or what we send on a common structure fire, a single-family home would be 4 engines, 2 ladder trucks, 2 medic units, 1 heavy rescue squad, and 2 chief officers, for a total of 27 to 36 people. Again, that depends on the number of volunteers who are staffing that day. In those areas without hydrants, 3 tankers are also dispatched for water supply. Now, on that particular call, all of those engines, all of those units that are dispatched have a specific function once they arrive on that scene. The first due engine deploys the initial water supply line. They perform an initial scene assessment and size up, determine strategy for mitigating the incident, and deploy the initial attack hose line. The second arriving engine completes the water supply by connecting to a hydrant and the supply line from the first engine. They deploy a backup attack or a second attack hose line to assist with the extinguishment. The third arriving engine serves as the rapid intervention team in the event a firefighter is injured or lost and needs to be rescued. They ensure the building has been made as safe as possible, securing the ingress and egress points to the building. They monitor the structure for fire growth or any structural changes that may occur during the fire. They assemble a cache of tools and equipment for firefighter rescue if needed, and identify a secondary water supply that they will establish with the fourth arriving engine. That fourth arriving engine establishes that secondary water supply and deploys a hose line to the rear of the building. The first arriving ladder truck is positioned at the front of the building, deploy their ground ladders as needed, rescue victims trapped beside or above the fire, and identify doors and windows that may be needed for ventilation. They then establish vertical ventilation and assist with search and rescue if needed. The second in-ladder truck is positioned at the rear of the building if possible, deploy ground ladders, position the elevated master stream, the water nozzle at the tip of the ladder or the platform to protect any exposures, and they assist with forcible entry, search and rescue, salvage and overhaul, scene lighting, and ventilation. The heavy rescue squad arrives and performs search and rescue for trapped victims. They remove them from the structure and provide care until a medic crew can take over. They secure the utilities to the building, check for any hidden fire areas, and also perform salvage and overhaul and atmospheric monitoring. The medic units arrive on the scene and the first due unit will serve as the initial rapid intervention team until that third due engine arrives. They will prepare EMS equipment to care for any patients who may be located and provide medical support. That first arriving medic unit may also have to go operational with a fire engine crew depending on the situation. The first officer who arrives on the scene establishes command, evaluates the incident, and makes any modifications to the strategy as necessary. They're responsible for conducting accountability of the crews on scene, communicating with the dispatch center, and coordinating with partner agencies such as the service utilities and our law enforcement partner. The second arriving officer assists the incident commander with situation status and resource status, assumes a tactical command position within the fire building as needed, and assists with conducting accountability and communications. In 2014, Stafford County Fire and Rescue saved $13,716,000 worth in property. That's not including contents. That's just structure alone. Property loss in the county was $2,105,000, again, not including contents of the building. We had 9 commercial building fires and 68 residential fires. Another question that we're commonly asked is concerning our EMS response. A typical medical emergency for chest pains in the county, we will send the closest first responder unit and the closest medic transport unit. The closest first responder may be indeed a fire engine, and we're frequently asked, why do we send a fire truck when there is no fire? The reason for that is simple. All of our career staff units in the county have at least one advanced life support provider on board with a defibrillator and with airway equipment. So they're able to get there in case of cardiac arrest, they're able to deliver that shock, they're able to take care of the airway, they're able to do that, and they may actually be the closest unit. In some cases, the medic unit may be there first, the engine continues in and assists the medic unit as needed. As I talked about our daily staffing a few minutes ago, again, I mentioned that we have career units here. You see the red and yellow Maltese crosses. We have a staff unit at Berea. We have one at Mountain View, one at Shelton Shop, and one at Aquia. The career medic units are at Potomac Hill Station 10, Rock Hill Station 8, Stafford Station 2, Hartwood Station 6, Falmouth Station 1, that's shown here as an 11 on the map, and White Oak Rescue, which is shown as number 7. Ops 5 is a vehicle I'll talk about in just a minute, was part of our Advanced Life Support pilot project, and it is stationed at Brook Station 5. As I mentioned previously, this deployment model gives us an 8-minute or less response time 70% of the time. What I'd like to do now is walk you through one particular day last November and show you just how quickly our current staffing can be depleted. All of the units I just mentioned were staffed. In addition, we had staffed volunteer units at Falmouth, Stafford, and Rock Hill. At 2 minutes after 3 in the afternoon, we had an EMS call in the Falmouth area that took the medic and the engine from Falmouth out for that call. 12 minutes later at 3:14, we had a residential first alarm in the north end of the county, and that took units from Aquia, Shelton Shop, Mountain View, Falmouth, Potomac Hills, and Stafford. Immediately after that residential first alarm was dispatched, we then had an EMS call that was dispatched in the Hartwood district, and that took the medic unit from the Hartwood station. A few minutes after that, in fact 3 minutes after that, we had a local alarm off of Garrisonville Road. The closest unit to that was a Marine Corps Base Quantico fire unit, and they were dispatched for that call. At 15:22, 20 minutes after that initial call went out, we had an auto accident in the south end of the county that took Quint 12 and Medic 14 from their stations. That left us with Medic 7 at White Oak Volunteer Rescue and Ops 5 at Brook. We had no fire apparatus left in the county at that point. Within 20 minutes, we had depleted the majority of our resources. Mutual aid was utilized. Quantico ran one call. We had units from, I believe, both Prince William and the city of Fredericksburg who came in for station fills. While this is not an everyday occurrence, it is happening more frequently. We monitor these situations and those where we have what we call a response matrix deficiency. That is, we're unable to send the units that are called for in the dispatch protocol or response matrix. This most frequently is an engine or a ladder truck, but in some cases has been a medic unit. In the last 6 months of 2014, we averaged 15 response matrix deficiencies per month. The fire and rescue portion of the public safety staffing plan is designed to be scalable depending on the amount of funding available and is geared specifically to addressing gaps in our service coverage area. A good portion of our efforts are directed at what we do prior to calling 911, public outreach, fire inspections, classes. Our staffing plan is specifically directed at what can be done after calling 911. So what is the need? The need, very briefly, is for coverage in the northwest quadrant of the county, the far northeast, as well as the eastern third of the county. And the staffing there that we have is in place, but it has proven to be at sometimes inadequate just simply because of call volume and the distance to be covered. Now, as far as what we've done so far to try and shift our resources and make them more applicable, we have made changes to our response matrix or the dispatch protocol, and that has been designed to make sure that we get the correct unit to the correct call. We accomplished that finally last summer, and so far it has been working well. We realigned the response area for Quantico Fire and Rescue, and we have clearly delineated that area now. In the past, it was somewhat hazy. We've clearly defined that and communicated that to Quantico's personnel. Our Heart Safe community effort has been geared toward making Stafford more of a heart safe community. This is an outgrowth of the Gwyneth's Law effort. It's been a collaborative effort between county agencies as well as our partners at the schools. And that effort was recognized recently by our designation from the Commonwealth as the first heart-safe community in the Commonwealth, as well as by the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and we received their large community award for 2014. Our Advanced Life Support Pilot Project was a project that we undertook last year for a 12-week period, and this was under the direction of Assistant Chief Joe Granger. And our premise there was to determine if we had some staffing options that were available to us. And what we did was we transferred the medic unit from Station 5 at Brook out to Rock Hill Fire Station 8, and we put a quick response vehicle with an acting company officer / advanced life support provider at Brook. And for those 12 weeks, what we wanted to see was if we could reduce response times and if that would have any effect whatsoever on our volunteer staffing. Both of those areas were struggling somewhat with their staffing numbers. What we found at the end of that 12 weeks was that not only did we reduce the response times in that area, but we did in fact increase our volunteer participation and the availability then of staff resources at both of those stations. We have created a scalable staffing plan that really is designed to meet a wide number of needs, but more specifically the fact that we just simply are not able to cover all of the stations in the county, and we are not able to meet our 8-minute or less response time standard. So again, as I said, the need is in the northwest quadrant, the far northeast, and the eastern third of the county. Our staffing plan addresses a medic unit or an engine at Company 8 at Rock Hill, a paramedic engine company at Company 10 at Potomac Hills, and a paramedic engine company then at Company 5 at Brook. We feel that those are the three main areas that where we've seen a decrease in our response times. They are in some cases medium population density or low population density, but there are areas that have potential growth down the road. The staffing situation is extremely dynamic. This particular plan that you have before you today was projected through FY17. In some areas, our needs have already changed in the 15 months since this plan was first presented, and we felt it was necessary to reprioritize some of those. And we did that, presented those changes to the Public Safety Committee at their September 29th meeting last year. This current situation offers us a number of opportunities. We believe that the Advanced Life Support Pilot Project demonstrated a clear benefit to having an adaptive staffing model with a career medic unit at Rock Hill Station 8 and a quick response vehicle at Brook Station 5. Overall, the project showed tremendous success in response time reductions in both areas involved. In the Brook area, we had a reduction of 1 minute and 26 seconds in response time and a 22% increase in the availability of a staffed engine, tanker, and heavy rescue. In Rock Hill, we had a reduction of 1 minute and 3 seconds on our response time and an 18% increase in the availability of staff resources at that station. The project showed us that a quick response vehicle staffed by an advanced life support company officer is an effective staffing option for low-density areas with available volunteer personnel. Additionally, we found the adaptive staffing model medic unit is an effective staffing model for medium-density areas with available volunteer personnel. There are other areas of the county where both of these staffing models could be employed, and we are continuing our research into that possibility. However, it will only be possible with the addition of field positions. As I explained earlier, this is a very dynamic situation, and we reprioritized the needs last fall and presented them to the Public Safety Committee. You have the full proposed plan and can see that we have broken our request into 3 separate phases with an alternative option for phase 1 if needed. While I recognize the plan in total looks complex, we have worked diligently to boil it down to essential needs so that we may continue to provide excellence in service to the county and our residents. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Any questions for Chief Lockhart?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mildy.
The order in which you add rescue squads has Brook at the end. Is that in the order you would like to do it?
Mr. Milday, I think we're open right now. Again, in the 15 months since we put this together, we've seen some changes, and I think what we'd want to do, it would all depend on the number of personnel that we would receive, and we'd have to look at that and see. They're not necessarily in that specific order. That's simply how we presented it in the phasing.
That's good. And the changing to the quick response vehicle at Brook, was there a negative associated with that?
I can't honestly tell you that there was a negative. I think for us it was a step forward in demonstrating the effectiveness of that particular concept, which is not necessarily new to the county. That was a method that was employed by the county a number of years ago. I think what we found was that it allowed us in times when maybe there were only 1 or 2 volunteers at the station. Now, in that case, if they had 2 volunteers, they had a 3rd crew member. So instead of the single quick response vehicle being in operation, we could put that paramedic engine company in service then. And in many cases, that's what's happened.
Oh, I see. So the quick response is always available, but if there's enough volunteer force there.
If there are enough volunteers there, we will take that acting company officer off the quick response vehicle and put the engine in service and take the quick response vehicle out. So that gives us the benefit then of it's not just one guy in an expedition. It's 3 people on a staff paramedic engine company.
The ISO report, not the one we heard about earlier, but the ISO report on that affects the insurance rates for your dwelling in the event your house is on fire or has fire damage. Last time we saw that, of course, the very tip of Marble Point Road was still it went into the 10 category. It's in the worst category.
I believe it was probably a 9.
And is that the worst?
10 would be the absolute worst.
Okay. Well, and it increases your insurance bill. Where else in the county do we have that?
Do we have
a 9?
Well, actually, we just, what Mr. Romanello was referring to earlier, the last report that we got, we had kind of a midterm review with ISO, and we went from a 5.9, a split classification, and we went to what they call a 4.8B. So there's a change in the classification. There's going to be some savings realized by some homeowners, but where we're lacking really is in the area of water supply. We have a large area of the county that doesn't have hydrants. And so what we've done now is we've attempted to look at doing a tanker shuttle, which is another test that we would do with ISO. And if we can prove effective water delivery and fire flow with that, then there's potential for us to reduce that rating just a little bit more. The area that you're speaking of, whether it's a 9 or an 8B, we have areas not only in Marlboro Point, but we also have areas out in the Heartwood section that don't have any hydrants, and we rely on a tanker task force.
We have lots of areas without hydrants, but are they all ranked? Are there areas in Heartwood that are ranked as low as Marlboro Point?
I would have to go back and double check that, but my belief is that those areas would probably also now be considered probably an 8B.
And you think that Marlboro Point is now an 8B?
I believe
That's
so.
the new classification system. And then in practical terms, I mean, we can't get support from Fauquier County. Not that there's much to be had. I don't know how that works, but houses that catch on fire out in that brook area burn down usually because you just can't get to them any more quickly. Is it just not a cost? I don't see a plan to increase. I don't know what our plan is to try to get water suppression closer to those areas. Is it just not cost effective? There's certainly some of the more expensive homes, but I'm not sure whether their tax base justifies or does justify. I don't know if it does or not.
Obviously, extending water lines is a very costly proposition, and I don't know that we have not engaged that part of the discussion as far as extending water supply to those areas. Obviously, that would account for something, but it's really at this point it's a matter of time and distance. And as you well know, there's parts there that we have difficulty reaching, not even in 8 minutes, but sometimes in 15 minutes. We have, even with Station 9 at the entrance to Aquia Harbor, there are parts of the harbor that we have difficulty reaching in under 10 minutes, just because of the terrain and the streets. So it for us to really get to 8 minutes or less 90% of the time, you're looking at not just adding staff, but also adding stations.
Is do you recall if Thorny Point and Canterbury are outside of the 4 or 5 and jump to the 8B or 9? Right?
I'd have to check on that and see.
Last question. And I should know the answer, but I don't. What is the status of the dry hydrant that Canterbury have been working on for years? Did that ever happen, or did we give up?
To be honest, sir, I don't remember. I'd have to check with the fire marshal.
No problem. Just let me know when you get a chance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cavalier.
Chief, you had in your staffing plan upgrades, you had a paramedic unit for 10.
Yes, sir.
On the plan. Are you saying there's no paramedic unit there now? I thought there was.
No, so there's a career staffed paramedic transport unit at Potomac Hills right now.
Okay.
What we would look at doing then is putting a paramedic engine company there. So it'd be instead of staffing the ambulance or the medic unit, they would staff the engine, and we would reallocate that medic unit somewhere else in the county.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'd hope that if we as we implement this staffing plan, based on money, I'm sure that this board would support putting back what they took from Brook and moved over to Rock Hill. At least have that conversation with me at that time.
Okay. Chief, thank you, and thank you and all your folks for what you do. It's very much appreciated, believe me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sheriff Jett.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good afternoon. Sheriff Charles Jett. Slide, please. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the staffing presentation that I'm about to present to you is different than the ones previously presented to the board, in that it's the most comprehensive study that's been done to date. Unlike previous studies that focused on field operations, and criminal investigations, this study encompasses all 7 divisions of the Sheriff's Office to include emergency communications, animal control, administrative services, court services, and professional standards, each of which serve an integral role in protecting our community. In the time that I have with you today, I would like to give you some understanding of our staffing needs, past, present, and in the future. For years, law enforcement had used population as a measure for staffing needs. Police departments generally used a ratio of 1 officer per 750 to 1,000 residents, and that's what most localities used as a staffing measure. This formula was based on the pretext that with more people comes more crime and service demands. While there's some validity to this thinking, and many departments still use this standard, population alone is not the best predictor of crime and service demands. It was not until the late 80s and early 90s that a workload-based formula was widely accepted as a measure for the number of officers needed to serve a community. Much of what we do in law enforcement can be quantified and used as a measure of the number of personnel needed to meet the demands. A simplified example we use is that of the widget maker. If a company demand is to make 50 widgets a week and one widget maker can make 10 in an 8-hour shift, then how many widget makers do you need to meet the demand? And the answer, of course, is 1. So since that time, the formula and methodology has been refined and developed to include other functions within a law enforcement agency beyond the frontline officer. So our first workload-based study was commissioned by the Board of Supervisors back in 1991 and included both the Sheriff's Office and Fire and Rescue. That study set the foundation and understanding for law enforcement staffing based on workload. The study authors then wrote, and I quote, "Experts in law enforcement at the FBI and local level have suggested a range of 40 to 60% of an officer's time be used for preventive patrol and deter crime and implement outreach programs to reduce the fear of crime." That 1991 Buracker study recommended at that time 10 deputies immediately and a total of 34 over the next 4 years. While we did realize some increase in staffing over the next 10 years, it did fall short of the recommendation. Then again in 2001, 10 years after the first study, using the Buracker study formula and methodology, we performed an internal staffing update. That study too reflected critical shortages in patrol and criminal investigations. And then in 2007, using a grant from Homeland Security, I contracted with the International Association of Chiefs of Police to perform both a management and a staffing study. As a result of their workload findings, they found that 80% of a deputy's time was consumed by workload, which only left 20% for proactive community policing time. IACP wrote in their recommendation, I quote, "For a jurisdiction the size of Stafford County, 40% uncommitted patrol time is recommended." To achieve that level based on 2007 workload, IACP recommended 23 deputy sheriffs and 6 first-line supervisors. Since that time, 15 deputy sheriff positions have been added to patrol. I think it's important to look back and to see that we actually have been trying to work toward, we collectively as the board and myself as sheriff, to work toward achieving the staffing goals, but unfortunately we've fallen short. And much of it is to do with this second bullet here, and that is the changing community that's driving our resource demands. I know I'm not telling you anything that you don't know by saying that the population has increased over 13% since our last patrol staffing increase in 2008. Currently at 138,000 population with a projected 2% increase annually. Community business growth is at an impressive pace. And of course, we have more congested and complex transportation systems, which has increased traffic-related incidents and slower response times. I point out that the national standard for law enforcement response to the scene of an emergency is 3 to 5 minutes. Ours is over 7 minutes. It was found to be 7.5 minutes, to be exact, 7.43 minutes in 2008 ICP review, and unfortunately we've been unable to influence that number, and it remains over 7 minutes. And then finally, this last bullet here kind of talks a little bit about what we're doing and how we're managing without additional personnel resources. And technology has helped us. We most certainly are further advanced today in what we do and how we can do it, and doing it more efficiently and effective based on the technology that you've equipped us with. These officers today are able to literally solve cases in their car from computers as we are linked to law enforcement agencies, not only within the region, but throughout the state and other states around us as well. And that's just an example. Speaking to the study, this study was time and labor intense. It took 8 months to complete this study, and the data spanned 3 years, 2010, 2011, and 2012, and this study was completed in 2013. The difference in this study and the ones that I've previously described, number one is cost. It was done internally, and I'd like to just pause for a moment and thank my staff, and especially Mike Newhart, who was the project manager on this, for the detailed analysis that went into this. It's interesting to see departments that are larger than ours now making phone calls and inquiring about some of the methodology that was used, especially in functions outside of the patrol and criminal investigations. And it is a comprehensive look at every function within the sheriff's office, as I pointed out, and that's different than the other studies. While there are many layers in an organization, this study focuses on the first line and that first line supervision only. It's the most important function, and it's what's critical to providing for the safety of this community. And as we get into the study, this last bullet, updated employee availability patterns and applied state-of-the-art analysis, there were 5 approaches used to match human resource to the workload, programs, and goals. There was the work-based formula, and that's what I've primarily spoken to at this point. And that included, as you can see, patrol, call taker, and VSIN operators. These are positions that we can actually quantify a workload, and using that methodology determine how many people we need to do the particular job. The other is coverage-based formula, and that was used for animal control, court security, and sheriff, fire, and EMS dispatchers. I might also note, probably one of the most simplistic ways of thinking about the coverage-based formulas is the school resource officers that you just increased. That is a coverage-based position. You have to have, or if you want to have, then you have a position in the schools. Successful case management formulas. This was used for major and general crimes and criminal investigations. Bottom line is, how many cases can a detective work in a year? And 3 years of data was used for that. And then special formulas, civil process, kennel staff. Civil process, we actually use the state formula. How many civil process documents can a deputy serve in an hour's time? And then position-specific calculations. These are unique to a specific position, mostly the civilian positions. Okay, as I just mentioned, the staffing methodology and formulas for each positions are contained in your book. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'd like to focus briefly on the most important function in any law enforcement agency, and that is the deputy who is serving on the front line day in, day out, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Again, I emphasize, as the experts have emphasized, the importance of our deputies having sufficient time to conduct community and proactive policing patrols. I remind you that both the Buracker study in '91 and the ICP study in 2007 both agree that a minimum of 40% proactive patrol time is needed to be effective. In this slide, as you can see, the average day is broken into 3 categories, and I'll define those briefly. Calls for service. This is workload that is precipitated by citizen requests. It is not self-initiated traffic or criminal enforcement. 2, operational support time. This is defined as all that administrative time that takes up time within a deputy's day. It's defined as time during the work period other than committed time for calls for service. It includes, but not limited to, criminal and traffic reports, vehicle fueling and maintenance, court preparation, case file preparation, evidence preparation, documentation storage, roll call, citizen telephone follow-ups, and the list goes on. It's a very extensive list of that administrative time. And then proactive patrol time, that is the time defined as that time used for proactive or directed patrol, community policing, or other related crime prevention, traffic safety initiatives, and other self-initiated law enforcement action. And unfortunately, this slide here shows just a marginal amount of proactive community policing time in a deputy's day. This next slide, in order to help decrease the deputy's workload, first line supervisors are committing at least 50% or more of their time in handling the workload of a deputy. So this slide depicts the distribution of the workload and proactive time using first line supervisors, as is predicated on 50% of their time committed to handling calls for service. The utilization of first line supervisors in this capacity, of course, detracts from critical responsibilities they have in the oversight of patrol operations. And as you can see, it helps to increase the proactive community policing time, but nowhere near the recommended amount. And then this is the distribution we're attempting to achieve, and it's the distribution that was presented during the similar presentation I made before the board in 2007. The recommended 30% proactive community policing time is less than the IACP's recommended 40%. This decision was made by me after a detailed and careful review of the study and determining what would be an achievable goal to work toward. Quite frankly, we were well behind in 2007, and the number of deputies needed to achieve the 40% proactive policing time was unreachable in light of the budgetary constraints, and therefore I felt that a reasonable goal was 30%, and that was what was proposed. And while years have passed by, we feel that the 30% is still a more realistic goal. I'd like to take just a few moments and give you some perspective looking at some of our comparatives, which include Fauquier, Hanover, Albemarle, Spotsylvania, Loudoun, and Prince William. This slide shows Stafford as the third most populated jurisdiction. This slide shows the departments ranked by the total number of sworn officers, and as you can see, we're toward the back of the pack, ranked at 5th out of 7 comparatives. And then finally, this reveals what we're talking about here today. And as you can see, we're last in that pack of comparatives in terms of the number of officers per 1,000 population. Again, recognizing population isn't in everything, but it's just a measure to see. And again, I show you these 3 slides just to help reinforce what the staffing numbers bring forward, and that is that we are behind. This is the staffing study conclusion and the recommendations that come from it for the 7 divisions of the Sheriff's Office. The far left column shows the divisions along with the positions studied and recommended. The next column reflects the 2013 number of authorized positions in each of those categories. The only changes to this is the 6 additional SROs that you approved in FY14 that is still being partially supported by state grants. So while the numbers are reflected here, the study was concluded in 13. We didn't modify the study, but just showing some advances we already have. You've already approved some of those critical positions, and we are the middle schools now all have a school resource officer. And then the column beside that reflects the staffing study work and the number of positions needed to satisfy the workload standard for that particular assignment or responsibility. And I don't think it probably comes as a surprise to you that the 2 heaviest workloads found, or the two divisions with the heaviest workloads, are the two that need the most, and that's field operations and emergency communications. The staffing summary can be found on page 2 of the study, and in question period, if you'd like me to review that more, I will. Page 2 gives you that summary of those numbers of positions. Very quickly, there are many good things that would come from staffing in the various areas, and many of them are position specific. But overall, we would realize improved response times, more community-based activities, increased responsiveness to citizens, and what we feel to be a positive impact on crime rate. We've been doing research. There is a very extensive study out there from RAND Corporation that was done just a few years ago that used a number of metropolitan areas to show that a percentage of officers added to a department reduces crime, and they can make that correlation in the study. To me, I'm just an old country boy from White Oak, and I think that just makes common sense. But if the study says it too. This next slide, the columns on the left depict both a 3- and 5-year staffing implementation plan. Obviously, the impact is drawn out over a longer period of time in both scenarios, but we have to remember that this workload study is predicated on 2010 through 2012 data and reflects needs as of 2 years ago. So this is not a projection number. This is a reflection on what the data shows us back a few years ago. And then finally, this is what the 3- and 5-year implementation plan looks like in dollars and cents. In the 3-year plan, the cost is approximately $3.1 million per year versus $1.9 million in the 5-year plan. And again, we use these. I think the word of the day, week, month, year, scalable. We just brought about 2 plans to show you what it would look like if the board moved at some point to adopt some type of implementation plan or staffing formula. This is somewhat of an abbreviated version of the staffing study. Again, it took a long period of time, and a lot of good work went into it. It was still staying with what has been adopted in the law enforcement profession and in communities as a measure of a standard and a measure that is being used and adopted that is widely accepted. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time, and I'd be more than glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sheriff Jed. Do we have any questions for the sheriff? Ms. Bunke?
Yes, Charlie, could you go back to the one page, I think 2 or 3 back, and it references telecommunications, maybe back 1 or 2 more. Here we are, yeah, right there with your staffing needs. Perfect, right there. Okay, under communications, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. It says 20 under additional projected. Who are you referring to though? Are those the frontline people that are receiving the 911 calls?
They are. Some of them are call takers. Some of them are dispatchers, fire and rescue and sheriff dispatchers, and 2 of those are VCIN operators. VCIN operators, Virginia Criminal Information Network. Over the years, the General Assembly has continued to add standards or laws that require us to input certain documents in a period of time, usually 24 hours. It has increased our data entry load tremendously. On average, I think we're doing probably about 20,000 warrants and emergency protective orders and domestic violence documents each year. That is being shouldered right now by dispatchers. So that's just an example, but call takers and radio dispatchers are the other 18.
Okay, and then also I know that from our public safety meetings that our fraud and financial crime has really stepped up over the last couple of years. In this staffing plan, would you, because I think under detectives you have an additional 4 people and then 2 frontline supervisors, would you shift more people to that department now based on what you know, or leave it the way you have it here?
Yes, in the implementation plan, when it talks about either the 3 or the 5 year, how we would implement in each one of those categories, I would stay with the prioritization as it is in CID, because just like this year, and I know this is a tough year, but I went ahead and added it to the budget that I'm asking for 2 detectives. Yeah, with the increase in financial crimes, right now everybody is shouldering that workload. As you see, Ms. Bonke, and the members of the Public Safety Committee, we've increased by 100%. I mean, we're working nearly 1,000 or receiving nearly 1,000 financial fraud cases a year, and the average detective can work about 80 to 85 cases a year. So you can kind of do the math. Not every one of those are being investigated. But right now, our priority is to enhance CID, criminal investigations, by a few detectives to offset some of that workload, and also some patrol members.
I guess the only other thing I'd like to say is thank Chief Lockhart and Sheriff Jett, since I'm on the Public Safety Committee. I mean, I don't know about you, but I would like to have more coverage for our fire and rescue folks in our county. I think we have to decide as a Board of Supervisors, do we like only being able, as it relates to fire and rescue, being able to only meet the 8 minutes or less 70% of the time. We have some very rural parts of our county, which, as they were talking about Marlboro Point, it takes you 12 to 15 minutes to get out there. And so, do we as a board want to split out, the areas where we know we can achieve the 8 minutes or less, and then have a different target for other parts of the county? And then I guess I would just like to say that, I don't like being at the bottom of the list for Sheriff Jett's report as far as the number of deputies that we have compared to our population. And we have real serious needs in both of these departments, and I don't know how we're going to shoulder these needs with our current budget situation. But I think it's something that the board needs to take a serious, hard look at, because both of these departments, public safety is at the top of our list the last time I looked at it. So that's what I'd like to leave with the board. Thank you.
Mr. Mildy.
It's fully implemented. It's $9 million and change annually, correct? That once
over the 3 or the 5 year period.
Yes. Once yes. What is it? What is the reoccurring annual expense if you were to magically get a 50% increase?
The 9.2
annually, which and what is your total budget, and how much of that is shouldered by the county?
Current budget is a little over $24 million, and we're receiving approximately $4 million from comp board.
So the rest is coming out of the general fund.
Yes, sir.
And fire and rescue would be a similar situation. Just in response to what you said, of course, nobody wants to be on the bottom of the list. What I will say is this board has consistently done it of all the departments. We have held harmless the sheriff's department as more than any other, and we also in the last 8 years have significantly increased fire and rescue expenditures. Now that doesn't put us where we need to be, but every $1.5 million or $1.3 million is a penny on the tax rate. So really, all that we want to do it is important, and we all want to improve in these areas, but it has to be taken in context with the overall budget, because there's a limited amount of money and we can only raise taxes so much if we want to raise taxes. So Charlie, we're lucky to have someone like you of your caliber. You've made a name for yourself for good reason in the state, and I'm certainly happy we have you at the helm.
Well, Mr. Milday, thank you. And I know this is a presentation asking, it's hard to, I wish I could have added another 15 minutes praising the board, because over the years, we have in partnership tried to work toward staffing our agency in such a way that we're providing safety and security for a community that they come to want and expect and deserve. And we're doing all those things that we can to work internally to make that happen. I think we do. We tout that we have one of the safest communities around. That's because a lot of that is because we've got a great community. But I want to make sure that this board knows how much I personally and my department appreciate the partnership and the efforts that you've put forward over the years to make us whole. Again, these numbers, I mean, when I look at this, it seems to be unachievable, but I know working together as we have throughout the years will continue to provide the services citizens they deserve.
Any other questions for Sheriff Jett? Sheriff, thank you so much, and thank you and your force for what you do. It's greatly appreciated. What's the pleasure of the board? Do we go into closed session now, or would you rather defer till this evening? Mr. Thomas, take us to closed session.
Mr. Chair, I'll offer a resolution to authorize a closed meeting, whereas the board desires to hold a closed meeting for number 1, discussion concerning a prospective business where no previous announcement has been made of the business's interest in locating its facilities in the county, and 2, consultation with legal counsel regarding the courthouse manor conditional use permit application. Pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A5A7, this discussion may occur in a closed meeting.
Have a second? Second. Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion carries 6-0 with 1 absent. We're in closed session. We will reconvene at 7 p.m. this evening. Good evening and welcome to the evening session of the February 3rd Stafford County Board of Supervisors meeting. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, and Ms. Sellers will lead us.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to serve our citizens and make decisions for our community, Stafford County. Please continue to keep our community safe and the rest of our nation. We thank you for our daily gifts, your guidance, and your support. Please be with this board during tonight's meeting. In your name we pray. Amen. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we have a presentation, the National Night Out Award. And I'm pleased to say that our Sheriff's Office has put this on for a number of years. And this past year, Stafford County placed 18th nationally in the category of communities from 100 to 300,000. More than 7,000 people in this county participated in it, and in over 15 neighborhoods. And at the Stafford Marketplace, I believe I was told there were like 143 booths. So at this time, I'd like to recognize Major David Decatur, if you'd come down, Major, to present this award. And when I call your name, if you'd please come down. Nick Zumwalt, Daryl English, Patricia Copeland, Karen Sousa, Ryan Quarry, and Scott Clemens.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you very much. On behalf of Sheriff Jett and of course all the men and women of the Stafford County Sheriff's Office, we'd like to thank you for allowing us this moment tonight to do this little presentation on the National Night Out Award. We were so lucky to receive 18th place nationally recognized, and it took a lot of work and a lot of effort from many people, and of course Karen, Patricia, Daryl, and Nick, and so many others who were involved. We had over 15 different neighborhoods that participated. And of course, Stafford Marketplace, who allowed us to have the big event there, and then the Acquire Rescue Squad, Volunteer Rescue Squad, and the fire chief, and all the people, and first responders, and the fire members, and the sheriff's office. So many people involved, and we're truly grateful. And the goal of National Night Out is, of course, bringing people together and developing that partnership with the community, that police and community partnership, and also that camaraderie within the neighborhoods, and talking about issues, talking about crime prevention, and letting criminals know also that if they want to target these neighborhoods or any neighborhood in Stafford, that the folks in the community are vigilant and they've come together and they're paying attention and they're prepared. So I'd like to take a moment to present the plaque, beautiful plaque here, National Night Out Award 2014, to the people that really did all the work behind the scenes to make it happen. So, Patricia.
Actually, this goes to the Sheriff's Office. But thank you, everybody, for participating. That's what makes National Night Out such a success, is all you guys coming out to participate with us, and we could not do it without you. So thank you.
I just want to thank all the neighborhoods who were involved, and I just hope that we get more neighborhoods involved next year. 15 is just a few, and we have so many subdivisions in the community that like to get out more. So thanks.
Well, I can't take full credit for Widewater Village's participation, being recently elected to the to be the neighborhood watch coordinator, but we're definitely committed to raising awareness in the community, and it's a very great honor to be here and to be recognized with all of y'all. Thank you very much.
And if it's okay, I'd like to read the neighborhoods really quickly before we wrap it up. Thank you so much. We'd like to recognize Augustine North, Austin Ridge, Autumn Ridge, Brentwood Estates, Clearview Heights, Garrison Woods, Hampton Oaks, Madison Falls Run, Potomac Hills, Settlers Landing, Spring Lake Farm, Stafford Oaks, Stafford Borough Townhome, Widewater Village, Willow Park, and Woodland. Again, thank you for everyone who participated, and we look forward to a better year next year. God bless you.
Thank you, Major. Thank you guys very much. We do appreciate everything you do. At this time, we're going to have presentations by the public. I would ask that you confine your remarks to 3 minutes. You can speak on any subject that you would like. When you come to the podium, please give your name and address. There are 3 lights on the right side of the podium. The green light means go, the yellow light means we've got a minute left, and the red light means time to wrap it up. I do have 2 speaker cards, and I'll read those in order. First speaker is Mr. David Starr. Mr. Starr, come on down.
Hi, I'm Dave Starr, live at 106 Hope Road, and today I want to briefly talk about the Courthouse Manor project. They have a conditional use permit that was supposed to be brought before the board tonight, and then changed. The schedule got adjusted. In front of you is my written ring marks there, and I sent all of y'all more detailed email last week when I really found out about this project there with all the signs posted in the area, and got the certified letter earlier when it was first scheduled in November. My family had a medical emergency, and I was not really home to go ahead and take care of that, even though I did receive the certified letter. But briefly stated is that as I guess it's called a proffer, whatever, that the developer conveys upon the county is that 4-lane road, the Stafford Courthouse Bypass Road, will be routed through this development, and then in turn the developer wants to go ahead and have the zoning rules amended to allow them to go ahead and put additional density. So as built, they could go ahead and put in 50, I'm sorry, by a use, they can go ahead and put in 50 homes as the current zoning laws are now. And then what they're asking for is for y'all to grant them to put in 75 homes. And briefly, I just want to go ahead and put in why I'm opposed to this. I have to be a little bit selfish here. When I went ahead and relocated into Stafford County, this was my first home there, and it was just a wooded lot as it is now. And it that road's going to be 40 feet from my back door, so there's inadequate buffering for it. And in the written remarks, I have it a little bit less there. In their plans, they have continuous space as broken up into useless parcels of land. There's not even enough land for a soccer field in the open spaces. There's in the urban wildlife that are there. There's large herds of deer and foxes and animals and everything. And when they're clear cutting 32 acres of the 33 acres of land, there's no room for them to mitigate that effects. But please go ahead and read this, and thank you very, very much there.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Next speaker card I have is Elsie Whitworth.
Hello, my name's Elise Whitworth, and I live at 11 Citation.
I apologize. I said Elsie. It's Elise.
No problem.
I apologize.
I get it all the time. Anyways, my name is Elise Whitworth, and I live in 11 Citation Court. I would like to take this opportunity to address the Stafford County Board of Supervisors. My name is Elise Whitworth, and I am an International Baccalaureate student, also known as IB student, at Mountain View High School. I'm currently in my junior year. I addressed the Stafford County Board of Supervisors last November about my IB Creativity Action and Service project. called Princess Boot Camp. Princess Boot Camp is an interactive theatrical event produced by MVHS students for young girls grades K through 5 with the goal of breaking down the princess stereotype and building self-esteem and confidence. We had our last Princess Boot Camp on November 22nd and would like to make the Stafford County Board of Supervisors aware of the results. We had 67 little girls from 5 Stafford elementary schools participate in a 3-hour event. We had a really fun time learning about charity, anti-bullying, music, dance, and self-defense. We sold t-shirts with pictures and pictures with the princesses. The event grossed about $1,700 with a net profit that went to St. Jude's Children's Hospital and the Mountain View Wild Acts, our drama club. The television show Academic Seats, which airs on a local Spotsylvania cable station, filmed the event, and the host of the show interviewed the girls and the parents who attended the event. The feedback was extremely positive. We're running our second event on Valentine's Day, and we're expecting even more girls this time. We'll be teaching them about different cultures, charity, dance, cheerleading, and friendship. This time, the event's charity profits will go to a local family devastated by a rare pancreatic disease. I would like to invite and encourage all Stafford County families to bring their girls from kindergarten to 5th grade to this event. Princess Boot Camp costs $10 per child and $5 per adult. Princess Boot Camp will not have been possible without the Mountain View High School IB program, which encourages students to be citizens of the world and make a positive difference. So on behalf of the Princess Boot Camp staff, which includes Bregan Hanna, Jackie Gomer, Justin Schneider, Kinsey Carthon, Maddie Lindholm, and Najwa Kadir, I would like to thank the Mountain View School Principal James Stemple and IB Coordinator Lisa Renard for the IB program and their unending support. We would also like to thank the Stafford County School Board, in particular Miss Valerie Cottingham, for their support of this project. And finally, we would like to thank the Board of Supervisors for their support of the county schools, and particularly the Mountain View IB program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whitworth, and thank you so much for what you're doing. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
I know the rest of the board does as well. So all the speaker cards I have this evening, so I'll open it up on my right. Is anyone on my right that would like to come and address the board? Seeing none, I'll move to my left. Anyone on my left that would like to come and address the board?
We're good. Computer?
Computer, please.
Paul Waldowski, 8 Picket Lane. 9 months from today will be voting day. I commend you, the Board of Supervisors. If you see, all the pictures are up to date, so now each of you can see your elected officials. Last year, we didn't have that. If you notice, see, Waldo just fit in there. Yeah. Where's Waldo? Did you see? Oh, he's... I know, well, but you never know what's going to happen. And so you see, that's one possibility. And then, another possibility is there could be a new chairman too. So please be aware of those aspects. Now tonight I knew it was in recognition of the night out, so I didn't bring any of my sheriff's card stuff today, but maybe I'll bring it next time. But I will ad-lib a couple of aspects. If things happen, I will bring T-shirts to the Princess Boot Camp, and I think that's a great program. I've been a big supporter of the IB program. I live across the street from Mountain View. I also use a coin called IBM. I was at an IBM presentation today, so IB works very well. Now, the real reason I'm here is because last meeting, it specifically said participation of all citizens is encouraged. And then when I raised my hand to do participation of all citizens encouraged, I was told after you sat there as a board and the staff eating dinner, and I couldn't say nothing about UDAs, the undeveloped downtown areas that don't exist in this county. Now, a neat idea came up, which I was going to share with you all, and that was the TGA, called a targeted growth area. But really, during the discussion, I heard the word transportation. And I thought Transportation Growth Area would be a very good acronym to incorporate, especially since we were talking about the Brook Point area that was going on in this arena. Now, I don't know how we're going to fix this, but please don't advertise participation of all citizens is encouraged unless you're actually going to let me as a citizen or any other citizen actually participate. I was not going to be, confrontational like I usually am, because, if you vote yes, I'm voting no. But I think that's a very important aspect that most of the voters have no concept of, and I think it's only fair. And let me all remind you that, in 2064 will be the 400-year anniversary. The 17-year cicada will be back.
Thank you, Mr. Waldowski. My compliments to your photographer. You certainly made my slot look a little better. Anyone else in the room would like to address the board this evening? Seeing none, we'll close the public presentations and bring it back to the board. Item number 19, Planning and Zoning, Stafford Regional Airport Compatibility Land Use Plan.
Can I have the computer, please? Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mike Zaraf with the Planning and Zoning Department. Erica Ely and myself are going to present the draft airport land use compatibility plan that was developed by a subcommittee of the Planning Commission and Stafford Regional Airport Authority. This subcommittee included Stephen Apicella, Lindy Kirkland, Daryl English, and Hamilton Palmer. Representatives of the subcommittee are present tonight. The issue before you here would be consideration of airport-compatible land use guidelines around the Stafford Regional Airport as an element of the comprehensive plan. The document itself that you've received is identified as potentially a section that might go within the land use plan chapter of the comprehensive plan. The plan would be utilized as part of the comp plan. It would serve as guidelines when considering rezonings and conditional use permits. They would assist all parties, including elected officials, staff, landowners, and developers when considering specific development proposals. The guidelines would not impact current zoning rights that already are in place on a property, and they would also complement and help inform any existing zoning requirements, such as the current zoning airport overlay zoning district that we have in place. Also, consequences of not having the land use compatibility plan may lead to potentially a proliferation of potentially incompatible uses that could affect safety and quality of life of population, including residents and employees and visitors around the airport, and the economic viability of the airport itself due to increased noise complaints potentially as one of the consequences. So the timeline on how we got here, back in April 2nd of last year, there was an initial meeting held between the Planning Commission and Regional Airport Authority to discuss concerns that with conflicting land uses, and at the time, at that meeting, a subcommittee was formed to look into developing guidelines. The subcommittee met from June to October. They had 6 individual meetings where they worked on developing these guidelines. November 6th, with a draft in place, they held an open house where provided the public the opportunity to provide specific comments on the draft plan at the open house, and they did include then an extended open comment period that ran through November 20th. Following this open comment period on December 18th, the subcommittee took those comments in and made modifications and finalized a draft document. On January 28th, this then was presented to the Planning Commission. which following briefing, the similar briefing, the Planning Commission did want to send this document on to you for input prior to moving forward. Also, staff would note that the joint committee process was open and transparent. The public was invited to all the meetings, was allowed to offer their thoughts and comments during each session as well.
That's the end of the timeline, is right now?
Yes. And now so the draft's been created and now it's up for consideration as to what to do next.
And you're probably going to have that at the end of this presentation, but as the next action you would request is input from the board or referral back down to the Planning Commission?
Correct.
Thank you.
So the plan itself is made up of a few different sections with an introduction, background on the airport itself, the area of impact around the airport, an analysis of zoning and land use in place, and the compatibility guidelines. So first, looking at the introduction. Okay, the basis for this request is stated within the introduction. There is a comp plan policy in place in the main comp plan document that states that the county should develop land use compatibility standards for new development to conform to within the aircraft approach patterns of airports and landing strips. And the introduction does note that the growth potential in and around the airport is high. And in general, good planning practice would be to minimize conflicts that might occur between conflicting uses. Then there's a background section which does review the history of the airport, existing conditions and operations. It does then talk about future plans. The image that you see on the screen is out of the airport master plan. It does show areas of expansion that are proposed, including 1,000-foot runway extension, which is highlighted in green.
This expansion, what is the purpose of this expansion? It just wasn't really clear.
The purpose of the expansion, my understanding, is to allow jets that use the airport to fly longer distances.
And so it's current users of the airport, not necessarily attracting new users, or is it kind of both?
That is my general understanding. I would have to defer to airport authority members for more clarification on that.
And when is the cell at the landfill set to close? Do we have any idea? Because there's a cell that's currently hindering some of the use.
I believe it's coming up pretty soon and may have closed already. But I'm not positive on that either. I'd have to check.
Okay.
Yeah. Since this is hard to read, I think it's an interesting map. I'd like for you to just quickly go through those four colors and the phases and the dates for the people in the audience room.
Yeah, there's different phasing identified as part of the airport master plan. The green shaded areas highlight the phase one planned improvements, which range, according to this, from 2011 to 2015
and
or
that looks
16.
like to me to be just the airport runway extension and maybe a little bit of hangar.
And some hangars and parking expansion.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you have phase two from 2016 to 2020, highlighted in red. That, again, additional hangar improvements and facility improvements. Then phase three from 2021 to 2030 in blue. Additional parking expansion, and then additional hangars. And the final ultimate build out beyond 2030 in yellow, even more hangar space.
So it looks more like you were looking for. They're looking for more of the same type of traffic that they can accommodate after that first phase of the expansion of the runway.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the next section of the plan gets into defines the areas of impact. We define those as airport impact zones. This image depicts those airport impact zones. These closely correspond to the airport impact overlay zoning district that is currently in place. In developing these zones, the committee did started with the sub areas of the airport impact overlay. But during the process, some of the sub areas were further divided due to proximity to the airport and different degrees of noise and or safety concerns.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Thomas.
The runway center line is to the southeast. There's not one depicted to the northwest. Is that because the majority of flights, because of the prevailing wind, will be landing this way, so it's not really necessary to put the other one there?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, that's something we could add that in, but it just was, the focus was to place it in that location.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
And this also, I'm writing the questions down that you may not be able to answer, and hopefully we'll have someone if they can. If you can't, but we know that there's the two squares that are within the purple circle, oval. Those are what are we think of as the two different flight patterns that a small aircraft versus large aircraft might fly if both the north and the southern patterns were open. My question is, and I've heard Mr. Thomas ask it before, but not with a clear answer, is what types of planes actually use the large aircraft flight pattern? As a pilot, I know that I think of these larger planes almost always come in straight in on the blue runway center line, and they do not fly in a pattern like that. They're usually if they fly a pattern, it's one that's being created from it's been radioed to them, and they're much further away from the airport, holding to stay out of somebody's way. Do you know the answer to that question, or should I ask that of someone that's in the aviation field?
It might be best to ask some.
Yeah, thank you.
That of them.
Ms. Bunky?
I believe that the airport authority will be looking at and putting in the northern traffic pattern, because right now they don't have that pattern in there because of the cell at the landfill. But for safety reasons, most of the airports throughout the nation have both traffic patterns, not just one. Unless there are obstacles there that prevent you from having that. Do you know if that's true?
Yes. Generally, you would have full movement around both sides.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. So then, the areas that correspond with the airplane traffic patterns are shown in this image. The different traffic pattern areas have different impacts. So just to describe some of these different sub areas, the approach areas, as we kind of shown here, those consist of the AP1, 2, and 3 zones. AP1 is the closest area closest to the runway zone. So here's your runway area, and AP1 is closest in this location. And then AP2 is the next level out. These areas extend 14,000 feet in this direction and 10,000 feet in this direction out from the runway. And then AP3 is the outer approach area. The transitional zone are the green shaded areas located to each side of the runway. Then the horizontal areas, this is a sub area that was divided up during the committee's review. You have the H1 and H2 areas. Those are generally areas where circling air traffic would run parallel to the runway. Then the H3 sub area is where you're going to see the turning movements of circling aircraft.
Chair?
Yes, Mr. Mildy?
Mike, what if you look at the top center, go straight up through the center of the picture to the purple crest, and off to your left is a pretty dense development. What is that development? Just it looks like it might be around a golf course.
Augustine North.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So, so then the outer area, then the purple shaded area is the conical area. That's the outer buffer that ranges from 10,000 to 14,000 feet from the runway zone. And these airport impact areas do account for the 1,000 foot runway extension. So the plan also includes zoning and land use analysis. This analysis determines the type of potential development that might occur by comparing the zoning districts to the future land use areas in each of these airport subzones. This is just a sample of what the plan includes. Several of the areas show land use that is consistent with the current zoning. And this, for example, is the outer approach AP3 area. And looking at the charts and the amount of area, you can see that a lot of this area is property that is zoned A1. That's the majority. And then comparing that to what's recommended in the future land use plan, the majority of the area is planned for agriculture and rural. So from that, you can see that the land use is not going to change much in the future in this area.
Mike, let me ask a quick question. So this chart you have here, top chart says 7,000 acres. Are you telling us that 7,000 acres are impacted?
Right, within that AP3 zone.
And then at the bottom, that's the same acreage, correct?
It's a little bit more, yeah, a little bit less, yes.
Okay, do we have any idea how many property owners are involved there? That's probably an unfair question, but...
Yeah, we'd have to run a GIS check on that.
If you could do that, I think it would be helpful to the board. Okay. At least to me, anyway. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chair, what are the impacts? So have we gotten to that point? Or
I think he's working his way to that.
We'll be worked through and identify the recommended guidelines.
Thank you.
And so then the next slide then does look at one that identifies a zone that might have a much greater impact by future development. Looking at the H1 zone, the orange shaded area. The tables show that the majority of the area currently is zoned A1, but then when you look at the future land use recommendation, it is planned for the greatest amount for urban development area, and then business and industry is the second area. So you can see there would be a potential there of land being rezoned from A1 to a commercial or mixed use district.
Ms. Sellers.
Do you know which which UDAs fall on there?
Under H1, you would have the George Washington Village and Centerport UDAs.
Thank you.
So the next section of the presentation is going to go through the land use compatibility guidelines. I'm going to turn it over to Erica.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Just check this here. Staff researched a multitude of existing nationwide land use compatibility documents. A substantial amount of information was gleaned from the Airport Cooperative Research Program Report, which is a 3-volume report sponsored by the FAA, completed in 2010 by the Transportation Research Board of the National Academies in Washington, D.C. The report presented a comprehensive account of issues associated with land use around airports and provides valuable guidance to both airports and local jurisdictions around airports. Staff research also included noteworthy source documents prepared by the states of Washington, Florida, California, and Iowa Departments of Transportation. Additionally, a review of the comprehensive plans and ordinances of local jurisdictions was completed for references to airport land use compatibility standards. Policies were developed from a consensus of the research as a result of a dialogue by the subcommittee members and comments received from the public. The policies identify standards which apply objective criteria to determine compatibility. The land use compatibility matrix referenced in Policy 1.1, Table 1, is proposed as a tool to help identify compatibility between a particular use and the functional activities related to the airport. Uses may be compatible or have incompatible elements with an airport when located in a specific zone. The level of incompatibility is related primarily to safety, but also to the viability of both the airport and surrounding development. The matrix lists categories of uses and identifies the level of compatibility within the table as compatible, needing additional review, and not compatible. It should be noted that proposed policy 1.9 states that even when a specific project is identified as not compatible, it may be appropriate if it can be demonstrated that it would not negatively affect airport operations or safety of the general public upon additional review consistent with the proposed guidelines. Table 1 identifies specific compatibility zones across the top and categories of uses down the left-hand side, with general examples underneath each category. So, for example, an assembly use would be compatible in the AP-T and C zones, would require additional review in the AP3, H1, and H2 zones, and would not be compatible in the AP1, AP2, T, and H3 zones. And this slide just shows the remaining portion of the table, the additional land uses on the side. The additional review includes standards that are intended to address possible areas of incompatibility between categories of uses and a particular zone where the site is proposed to be located. There are multiple criteria that are considered, including externalities such as smoke, steam, wildlife attractants, and reflective building materials, a minimum of 1 acre contiguous open space on certain sites, and a minimum distance of 3,000 feet from the runway centerline for residential development. Also, certain development would require disclosure notice, 2 examples of which have been provided at the end of the document board received. One is recommended to be included with initial real estate sale documents, and the other is language for inclusion on subdivision, site plans, record plats, in addition to sales contracts, brochures, and promotional documents as applicable.
Yes, Mr. Melody.
Do we have the enabling legislation to accomplish that yet, or is that something that would require General Assembly? Anyone know?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Milday, that would be done through proffer statement.
Oh, thank you.
Applications for reclassification are often submitted in order to develop a proposed residential subdivision consisting of quarter-acre lots and sometimes result in a significant increase in density. As the matrix shows, this type of residential development is compatible in APT and C zones outlined in green. Would require additional review in the AP3, H1, and H2 zones in yellow.
Yes, Ms. Sullivan.
In this yellow zone, how many of these by right, how many neighborhoods are in there that would offer that by right now that have already been rezoned? Or are currently already like that?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Sellers, the question is how many neighborhoods exist in the area that would require additional review that meet the proposed standards?
Well, that would. How many? Let me think how I'm asking this. So within this yellow zone, my concern is how many developments have already been approved in there that would allow for these quarter-acre lots or smaller. Because wouldn't Colonial Forge fall in that that brand new neighborhood with some multifamily units and?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Sellers, I believe that Colonial Forge is in the conical zone, but I can check. Okay.
Down at the top of your H1, you've got the area that's wrapped around behind the school that's part of the Colonial Forge. That's in there. Then you go down around Centerport, and I forget what that development is there by Centerport that's been approved and been standing, I'm going to call it stale. I mean, it's not, they can still go forward. You got a large development there that's been approved. So you've got some within there already. I don't know all of them. I guess probably the question is, how many by right lots and existing homes would fall within that yellow, because they're all occupants, whether they're on a 1/4 acre or 3 acre lot.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Sterling, I think we were going to have to do some research to get those numbers for you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Milder.
But for by right lots, it really wouldn't come to us, correct? Because those would not require any kind of a board or planning commission action. So that's a done deal, whether we like it or don't like it, correct?
What's the question?
That's the question. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Milday, yes, the standards would be, as in the comprehensive plan, would be applied to applications for reclassifications, conditional use.
This is looking forward, and just never mind what mistakes we may have made in the past. And I think it's worth noting that about an inch or so of that tail to your bottom right of your screen, if not an inch and a half or 2 inches, is not, and that's on our little screens, is not in Stafford County and not something that we really can concern ourselves with. Right? It's a nice picture, but I just want to make sure that it's not as it looks huge, but a part of it's not even in our county. King George, right?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Milday, it's a small section.
I just can't see the lot lines underneath the tail, so I really.
In Mr. Thomas's district, Mr. Mildy. I'm sorry, you don't think that's part of the county.
Yeah,
well, I know part of it is, and I know where I live on the map, and I'm looking at King George from my.
There's a portion that goes in.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Milday, there is a portion in King George County. It's kind of a triangle on the right-hand corner of that extended AP2 area, the northern.
Yeah, I just can't tell how much, but okay. Unless you want to sketch it on there, I can guess.
And that was just a carryover of the.
Sorry, just going to draw it on
here. And we did look into zoning build out in these areas, and there was a question about in the H1. We did an analysis, and the by right zoning build out under H1 would be for the potential of 604 residential dwelling units. I mean, that's if every property built out to its full potential under current zoning, which included also some already approved projects. And but also remember that these guidelines do not affect property, current zone already zoned this way. It would just really apply when somebody's coming for rezoning.
Okay, so continuing with the residential development, the subdivisions with the 1/4 acre lots would not be compatible in the AP1, AP2, T, and H3 zones, shown in red. For proposals located in areas requiring additional review, residential proposals, like the one we're describing, these standards are identified in Table 2 and are applied relative to use and to zone. The application of these standards will result in a more compatible development in these locations and include open space requirements, disclosure notification, and noise mitigation measures if development is located under the flight pattern. And we just have another example reclassification for proposed commercial development. General retail and services are compatible in AP3, APT, H2, and C zones, which are shown in green. Require additional review in AP2, T, H1, and H3 zones in yellow, and would not be compatible in the AP1 zone, just shown in red. The additional review standards in Table 2 include population concentrations limited to within thresholds identified in Table 3, the incorporation of usable space, and lighting standards for the proposed commercial. Table 3 includes site-wide average and single-acre intensity thresholds, which are related to population thresholds. Site-wide average intensity is calculated by determining the total number of people expected to be on the site at any given time under normal conditions and divided by the total number of acres. This is a tool that we saw utilized in several of the documents. So this is just a proposed technique to identify these population thresholds. Single acre intensity is calculated by determining the total number of people expected to be within any 1 acre portion of a site at one time. So these are the thresholds that are from California. And to show them applied, if population thresholds were applied to 2 recent examples of commercial development applications we've had in the county, the uses would be compatible with the zones requiring additional review. The calculation to determine the number of people associated with a particular use can utilize parking requirements, which has been utilized by staff. So utilized 1.5 people per parking space required, as used in the California Airport Land Use Planning Handbook. So for example, McWhort Loop application consisted of 10,041 square feet of development on 2.92 acres. The county requires 4 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of use, or 41 spaces. The table shows that the site-wide average threshold in the AP2 zone is 60 people. This development generates 22 people according to the formula, and it is also well below the per acre threshold of 120 people at 62. This type of analysis would be part of an evaluation of a proposal for conditional use permit or reclassification.
You asked a question, why was McCourt Loop used? That's like 12 miles from the airport, 8 miles, I guess, close to Rappahannock River.
Mr. Chair,
just as an example.
These were just examples from recent applications. We can certainly do the analysis for in more detail for.
Thank you.
I just go back one. Mm-hmm. So and I think I understand it, but if you had a bigger lot, say you had a 400 acre something, you could put a lot of people on there and still be within, because of your acreage, you're basically your density per people per acre. So on 200 acres, if I put 50 people per acre, I can still put 10,000 people on that much on 200 acres, and by my math, I'd still be between these two.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Milday, the analysis would be a site-wide population average based upon the size of the property, which is true, and so your site-wide average will be lower with a larger piece of property. However, the particular use and the square footage of that use will determine the per acre concentration. So you're kind of looking at both of those thresholds.
What you're doing with it and how many people would be there.
Right.
But this doesn't preclude pretty high populations being able to gather. It's also a matter of what they're doing.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Chair, Mr. Milday. The Table 3 does show, the population thresholds are quite high. And we can certainly provide other examples of any other development you'd be interested in seeing. So in conclusion, we did want to say that the document has been reviewed and endorsed by the Virginia Department of Aviation. They stated that it will be extremely helpful for the airport and the county going forward. And their review did include a few suggestions regarding some technical modifications to incorporate into the document. we'd be happy to answer any further.
Any questions? Mr. Sterling?
I'll come back. You said the Virginia Department of Aviation?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Sterling, yes, sir.
Then the director of that used the Stafford Airport for refueling purposes? Can you check that out? That might be a conflict.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Sterling, I'm not aware of that, but we can certainly look into that for you.
Ms. Sellers?
So these additional reviews, what's the process going to look like, and what's it going to do to the timeline and the costs associated with rezonings or conditional use permits?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Sellers, the additional review would be part of the review of an application. It would just be another component or element, just as we review all variety of impacts of a development. This would just be one more impact to consider, compatibility with the airport. Regarding costs, that would be the board's purview as to whether an application cost would be approved for this type of additional review. And sorry, I forgot your third question.
That was it.
Okay.
I think in the case of Oakenwold, if the airport was the reason that it was denied, I think it would be quite a cost saver for the applicant had something like this been in place. I can see that it would be a big benefit to applicants to have some guidelines. Is that right? They would know that they would presumably have this information before they made an application at all.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Milday, yes, sir. Sorry for interrupting. The one of the benefits to having standards in place is a predictability element for development. When they come into a jurisdiction that has a regional airport, they can review the standards and design their plan accordingly from the beginning.
Now, you may have covered this, and I might not have caught it, but this was out of a subcommittee of the Planning Commission. Was it voted on its way here by the Planning Commission?
No, I don't believe it was.
Mr. Milday, Mr. Chair, Mr. Milday, it was voted to move to the board for consideration.
This was just through general discussion. There was not a public hearing yet at the planning.
But no recommendation, but was it a 7-0 or 6-0? Consensus.
General consensus to move it on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's my understanding, correct me, I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling.
You talked about in terms of the density uses, et cetera. Was there a discussion on how this would impact or how you would apply the cluster subdivision developments in this case? We got a lot of agricultural property. We have a cluster subdivision that allows them to go to smaller acreage. What was the consensus or discussion revolving how this would impact and whether a cluster is or is not compatible in these?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Sterling, the recommendations state that residential development should be clustered away from overflight areas and outside of the 3,000 foot requirement from the center line, and also clustered it in such a way that you have usable open space, which is at half an acre of contiguous open space.
Half of it would be contiguous open space.
1/2 of an acre.
Half an acre is contiguous open space? That's not much open space. That's my backyard.
Of continuous open space.
I don't live on the river like Mr. Mildy does. He is a very nice, 1%ers live well.
Contiguous open space for usable open space.
If you can get that to me for the record, I'd just like to see on the cluster, especially, I understand what you're saying, but clusters also, depending on what their property is, et cetera, could all be within that area. So they're clustering from one part of being within the area to another part of being in the area.
Right. The idea is, and the usable open space standard is a suggestion to have a 300 foot by 75 foot area at least.
In case a plane crashes and you got a really specific backyard to...
Well, not in the backyard, just in common open space.
Not big.
And the idea is clustering is preferred as to support more open space areas.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Thomas?
The way I understand it, the current zoning just doesn't get affected. So if I had a piece of A1 property, that's already a by right thing in A1 to do clustering. So you can't prevent me from doing that with any of this, correct?
Correct. Okay. I mean, we may, through the development
ask you to
process,
do certain things, suggest you do it, but in the end, it's a by right.
Correct.
Anything else?
Yeah, just basically. I had opportunity recently to go look at the Colonial Forge development in Speed, and they're beautiful. They're high density. Are those all already approved? all this stuff around Colonial Forge High School off to the?
Yes.
So that would not be, whether it should or shouldn't, I would argue that, I wish we'd done this earlier, but that would all be, that can be built without any kind of board approval. We can't tell them to cluster or to have any reduced density.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Sterling?
I think the question was raised, but I want to make sure you're going to come back with how many residents by right or existing or by right units can be built within these various non-compatible, compatible, et cetera zones?
Yes, and we have, we were going to come back with the number of existing units and we may have
And the number of by right units.
because we did do the zoning analysis and we do have the number of occupied lots.
And can you break that into two parts, one that affects the north and one affects the south? Because we've talked about this northern pattern and southern pattern.
Yes.
Mr. Milden?
There's no reason why a person that, not that people are profit driven often, but a person that owns property already zoned, hopefully would at least could use this as a common sense tool, right? And at least making a determination as to what to build, what they can build, and versus what they should build.
They could, yes.
Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Sterling?
I understand what Mr. Milley is saying, but what I'm getting at is, particularly if we're talking about opening, expanding and opening a northern corridor, and this document says there is an impact, there is incompatible uses. If we allow that to happen, that essentially becomes a land taking or a property taking of the people underneath for telling them that it's not compatible. Now, we may not be outright saying you can't build, certainly not through rezoning, but if they have by right units, you are telling them that it's incompatible, which has a definite impact on the value of their property. I mean, first and foremost, what I'm suggesting is we have to keep the interests of the people of Stafford at mind. That's first and foremost. How does this impact them? How does anything we do impact the people of Stafford? Whether it's this compatibility, what is being put forward here in terms of land use, or in terms of what we allow to go forward. How does that impact the people of Stafford? That's got to be first and foremost upon our minds as a Board of Supervisors representing those people.
I think erring on the side of caution, sorry, is the best route, but I don't think taking is the right word. A guide that says your land use, existing land use is incompatible, but with no enforcement would not be a taking. Mr. County Attorney, I told you you had something that was incompatible, non-conforming, if you will.
Mr. Milday, I would prefer that we consider matters like this in closed session,
Yes,
closed
sir.
in public discussion. I don't think that serves the well board.
Any other questions? Mr. Romanello, where do we go from here?
You can take it under advisement, Mr. Chairman. You can send some changes down to the Planning Commission, or you can send a formal referral down to the Planning Commission and direct them to hold a public hearing. I think those are the board's three choices at this point.
Chairman, I have another question.
Yes.
Is that something we could refer today, or do we need to wait a meeting and draw up a document?
Refer to
Is it already there?
like we need from legal guidance.
We have standard referral language, so I think the board could do it tonight if you're so inclined.
Mr. Chair, I'm inclined. I think you've done some great work and you've done it in kind of a short time frame. So wouldn't want you to feel rushed. But I would ask. I think they've done enough. They've shown us enough to tell them to continue to work on this document. I would make a motion to refer this back down to the Planning Commission for continued work.
Now, is that back to the Planning Commission for continued work, or for them to bring back their final version to us?
That's what I mean.
They need a public hearing.
Do I have a second to that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thomas. Any further discussion, Mr. Sterling?
I'd like to offer a substitute that what goes to the Planning Commission does not include adding the northern traffic pattern.
I have a substitute and I have a second. Any discussion? Cast your votes on the substitute. Oh, tally the vote. Forgot they always ask for me. The vote fails. The motion fails 5-2. Primary motion to send it back to the Planning Commission.
I have a comment on that.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd kind of like to sit on this for a minute and to listen to at least think about it for 2 weeks and come back and then send it back to the Planning Commission. So we've had some time to maybe come up with some questions to talk to Charlie offline. That would be my preference, and I'd like Yeah, I'd like to.
Well, we have a motion on the floor. Let's
speak to the
let's back up here. We have a motion on the floor. Mr. County Attorney, we've already had a substitute motion. Are we allowed to have a second?
You can have a second substitute motion.
Okay, you're having
Once
a
one's
substitute
complete.
motion to defer for 2 weeks. Mr. Sterling, you second? Is that what I heard? Discussion.
Just simply, there's no reason to rush this, but sending it back to the Planning Commission is not rushing this at all. We will have ample opportunities, public meetings on this. This is just the very beginning. I don't think a delay for the sake of delay makes sense. I'd like to let the Planning Commission start working on this. I'm not sure what their schedule is, but we can't get anything out of them in 2 or 3 months to begin with. So the sooner we let them start and let them know that we approve and on the whole the idea behind this, better.
Ms. Bonke?
Yes, I would agree with Mr. Milliday that I feel like we should send this back to the Planning Commission, have them answer some of the questions that have been raised tonight, and then decide if they're going to have a public hearing or bring it back to us at that point.
Mr. Sterling?
Mr. Mildy earlier made reference to we can't solve the mistakes made in the past. So we shouldn't rush into making any new ones. If we can't go back and fix ones from the past, we shouldn't be pushing this forward without all the information. Mr. Mildy just earlier asked a question of the county attorney regarding a legal matter and what it would constitute or not. And the county attorney has advised us to go into closed session to talk about that. And yet we're pushing this forward without even talking to the county attorney. Is 2 weeks really going to be that? I mean, are people that anxious to add this case, a northern corridor, and all of these elements to it? Or do we want to make sure that we do this right and avoid repeating mistakes of the past?
Mr. Thomas, you have any comment?
I'm in favor of going ahead and letting the Planning Commission continue their work, because all they did was take a pause as a courtesy to say, hey, Board of Supervisors, here's where we're at. They didn't even have to do that in the first place. They could have went straight to a public hearing. So I thought it was a good move on them to check with us to make sure they weren't way off in left field, and nobody could agree with anything. And I don't think we've heard any justification that this thing is nowhere near close. So I would be in support of them finishing their work, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity to beat it up here.
Mr. Cavalier, you have any comment? Any further comment, Ms. Sellers?
I'd like an opportunity to work on this a little bit more, not only for some of the questions that have been raised that I think regarding taking people's lands and downgrading the value of their property, but, you know, with all due respect, the Planning Commission was not elected to do stuff like this. We were elected to do stuff like this, and I think it is going to be a political issue. This is something that people talk about, and this is something that affects folks more so right now in the northern part of the county because they've never experienced it, and I'd like to defer it, but and some consideration. And you're right, it takes 2-3 months to get anything back, so why do we have to rush it? But if we're going to send it to the Planning Commission.
Yes, Mr. Melvin.
Well, the answer to that is because we owe it to the landowners to work effectively and efficiently, but also at a reasonable pace. We can't allow another applicant like the Oakenwolds to come in here and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with no direction from this board. Now, you all know here, and maybe in the audience that don't, that my question about a taking is one that I already knew the answer to. Of course, it is not a taking to suggest that you're an incompatible land use. I know the answer, and if the county attorney is more comfortable answering that in public, that's fine. But were this even being approved tonight, it would not have any kind of effect, taking effect on property with existing zoning underlying. But we're not doing that. We're not doing anything with a forced rezoning or that would affect the value of property tonight. We're just sending this, allowing the Planning Commission to continue their work. The idea that we're doing anything other than that is just inaccurate.
I'm not sure whose hand was up first. Was it Mr. Thomas?
We also have to keep in mind that this is an odd year, so we can't do anything with this in November and December. So the time frame this year is a little bit more crunched. I believe this is, since we're adjusting the comp plan, this is a land use matter, correct? So.
Mr. Sterling.
A couple of things. First, I'll go in reverse order. The idea that we'd want to rush this before the election to get it done before the people stand before the people, or the supervisors or candidates stand before the people, I don't think we should rush it before the election, and that's a terrible reason to try to move it tonight. The second item is Mr. Mildy says, well, a plan does not affect people or doesn't take people's rights. This is more than just a plan. Remember, we just turned down an amendment that wouldn't include the northern corridor. In other words, don't pursue adding this northern route. and yet you want to go forward with that northern route. That is a specific action that will, by the results of this study, have a definite impact to the property owners, the people, the citizens that are living in that area. You are now going to be putting forward something that's going to affect them, and you are asking to impose this on that northern area. That is a specific action that's being taken that will have an impact on those people. It will, Mr. Melody, it will.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas.
I didn't mean to infer that we should rush to vote it. What I meant was I've been involved with this process. I might not be here in January, so I'd rather, as the informed supervisor who's been part of this for 3.5 years, make that decision instead of throwing it onto a new person in January who has to start from scratch. So that's all I meant by that. The second thing you have to understand is you're making an assumption that that northern pattern is not the default pattern. It's there. The only reason we don't have a northern pattern is because of the birds.
Thank God.
It's actually very odd when you're flying in and you look in your book. It's almost you almost miss the fact that there's a right pattern into an airport because it's so unheard of to not have that left pattern. So the fact that we just have that right pattern is more risky than if we had the normal standard traffic pattern that every pilot expects to see when they come in.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
I meant to say, you know, the next item on the agenda is your discussion item of trying to stop. So the idea that this vote somehow endorses the northern pattern is kind of strange, since we're going to have that discussion as soon as this vote is taken, and then we'll decide. We'll vote specifically on that. You trying to get double credit for one item, it doesn't make sense. We will have that discussion next, but this is not about the northern flight pattern. This is about allowing the Planning Commission to continue their work, and we will have a chance to bring this to the public, and it's in a public hearing on multiple settings. So this does not have the effect of changing any zoning or devaluing any land, and it does not send a message that we endorse anything other than letting the Planning Commission continue their good work.
Mr. Sterling?
Mr. Mildy, I understand and I appreciate you and Mr. Thomas both being pilots that use the airport, that you are familiar with it. But Ms. Sellers and I, we represent the people in the northern part of the community, the people that are going to be impacted by this. We're asking for a 2-week delay while certain questions get asked. I don't think that that's too much.
Okay, with that said, I think Mr. Cavalier, you have a comment?
Well, I was for sending it down now, but they've convinced me that a 2-week delay won't change the world here, so I'm comfortable with waiting 2 weeks.
May I ask a question?
Please.
What do you expect to accomplish in 2 weeks? What is it that's going to happen in 2 weeks? What's the delay for? Mr. Jackson, you just suggested you wanted 2 weeks.
I think that's a pretty unfair question.
It's an unfair question?
It's an unfair question to ask for a fellow board member. You're putting him on the spot, and I don't think
ask
that's
anyone,
proper.
what's the delay for? What are we waiting for?
Let's wrap this up. I agree that we can do a 2-week delay. I don't see a harm in that. This is a huge document. I've read through it. I'm going to have a lot of clarification on this thing.
So we're waiting for clarification.
Mr. Mildy, I'm speaking. So I will vote for a 2-week delay. With that said, cast your votes. Tally the vote. Motion passes 4-3. I would also like the county administrator to draft a resolution for the next meeting to advise the airport authority to not do any further expansion, including the northern flight path, until this plan is complete and passed by the Planning Commission and the board. Bring that back on the 17th. No, I asked him to prepare a resolution for the 17th. I'm sorry?
Would qualify the 2-week notice that's in our bylaws that matters come up.
Correct. 2 weeks. Okay, speaking of the airport, item number 20, Stafford Regional Airport Proposed Resolution R15-41. Mr. Sterling.
Obviously, this is not a new issue. It has been out there not just 2 weeks, but 2 months, 3 months. Continue to express my concern, and I will continue to express that until such time as we take action. The airport that we have today, I understand what we have and what's on the ground. This is about its expansion. This is about the furtherance of that airport, the expansion of the runway that would bring in basically a larger impact, a larger utility aircraft. It also has the impact on the northern part of the community that's not currently impacted. Now, I understand what you're saying about the pattern technically exists on the records, but it's not permitted to be used right now, and in part because of the dump, maybe in whole because of the dump. But there are a significant number of people who would be impacted should that happen. It's not just, as Mr. Mildy pointed out, one community that's up there. There's about 3 or 4 dense communities, but there's a lot of people outside of that that would be impacted by this. And the compatibility study that we just had outlined some of those impacts. We know that no aircraft flies specific to any of those patterns anyways. And we see what happened, the tragedy that happened up in Maryland. I don't want to see us expand on something that will have such a significant impact on the citizens of Stafford County. I think that its current use, that's one thing. We're not talking about closing it, but we're talking about not expanding it. Not, as you put it, Mr. Mildy, I wrote it down to say it again, the mistakes made in the past. This is about not continuing that, not expanding upon those so that future boards, if God forbid something happens, they look back and say, well, that was a mistake made in the past. So I'm asking for your support for this board to go on record in opposition to the expansion of the airport beyond what it's currently structured for. So I will move that resolution.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second. Ms. Sellers. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Mildy.
A 2-week deferral for the same reasons.
Are you making a substitute motion?
Yes, sir.
I have a substitute.
Mr. Sterling just gave for deferring the last action.
I have a substitute motion to defer this, Mr. Sterling's motion for 2 weeks. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thomas. Discussion, Mr. Sterling.
I'll, if Ms. Sellers is amenable, I will accept the 2-week deferral, and we'll deal with this as one package in 2 weeks.
Okay. Do we require a vote, or did he?
No, sir. We'll put it on the next agenda.
Okay. Bring it back on the 17th. Oh, that's going to be a busy day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Bonke.
At the next meeting when we consider this resolution, I would like to have more information on the impact with the how far out and how far away the citizens are from this airport, the center runway, what the risk is of not having the northern traffic pattern. Is that more risky for people or less? Because I understand that's a risk management issue, and how that compares to other airports throughout the nation. I'd like to have a lot more statistical information on that for me.
Good.
Mr. Chair, that's a good point. Another statistical data point. I kind of brought up the fact that you only saw the center line to the southeast. That's because the wind normally is coming from the northwest. I haven't flown an airplane since 2008, by the way. Wind comes from the northwest, and you never land with the wind to your back or you'll end up in the ground. So the fact that the majority of the flights land in from the southeast, that means they're never going to go up and make that northern traffic pattern as a normal thing. That's going to be when the wind just happens to be coming out of the east, which is not normal for the airport. But I think there's probably some statistics on number of flights that land on the right pattern and the left pattern. I think if we base it on some numbers, maybe I'll even be surprised. I don't know. But I'd like to see some numbers instead of just hyperbole.
Yes, Mr. Mildy.
Along that vein, I'd like to have someone with some aviation expertise, and you may choose whomever you like. We certainly know some, to explain some of my questions about who uses the center line and why there's a bigger square and a smaller square, and why I don't think personally that the big airplanes do use that outer square on either side. I think that they come straight in, but I want someone to make sure that to talk to us about that.
Mr. Romanello, can you arrange that?
Well, I would certainly be happy to invite representatives from the airport authority, the airport manager, if you think that would suffice.
Or maybe Mr. Weaver, he's come occasionally. Randy Weaver, is that the right name? Virginia Aviation?
Randy Burdett.
Burdett, I mean.
We'll invite him too.
Yeah, and if we could get those statistics that Mr. Thomas and Ms. Bumke asked for and distribute that to the board as soon as we possibly can, I think that'll be a help. Okay, let's move forward. Item number 21, which was an add-on. Discuss House Bill 1887, transportation funding. Mr. Baruti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tim Baruti, Deputy County Administrator. The committee has been meeting every Friday since the General Assembly came into session. We have debated and discussed many bills. This bill obviously is drawing some attention, and the committee asked that we bring it to the full board for consideration. I'll offer just a quick highlight of some of the key provisions and then gladly try to answer some questions, maybe with the help of others. Again, House Bill 1887 is offered by Chris Jones, Chairman of the Appropriations Committee. First and foremost, it removes the Executive Director of the Virginia Port Authority from the Commonwealth Transportation Board and makes the members of the CTB subject to removal by the governor for cause, for malfeasance or misconduct. That's a new provision. The bill, as the committee suggests, is intended to increase CTB independence, and those provisions, many would suggest, accomplish that. It's no longer a political body if adopted, so they would say, because again, the governor has to have cause for removal of CTB members. Those provisions related to CTB membership would take effect July. Yes, sir.
Yeah, on that,
Chairman.
One of the elements, or what they say is cause, is disobeying a lawful order. The governor would be able to replace somebody for disobeying a lawful order. Can you define what disobeying a lawful order? He's a governor. If he tells them, here's the package, vote for it, is that an unlawful order?
Seems as if that would be a matter of interpretation.
Exactly.
Mr. Sterling.
The Attorney General these days is some would take different interpretations on his views of the law too. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other major provisions include a distribution of resources along a 40-30-30 cut. This is a new 40-30-30 cut. This would take essentially the existing 10 pots of money down to 3, 40% going to the state of good repair, as the bill calls it, and 30% going to district grant programs, the last 30 going to high priority statewide projects.
Mr. Sterling.
All right, on that. So let's start with the first one. 40%, the largest pot, will go to state of good repair. So if we've got a major congestion problem, I mean people are stacked up for hours trying to get through, how will state of good repair enable greater throughput and improve the transportation infrastructure of the Commonwealth of Virginia? How many lanes can I add? How much intersection capacity can I add through state of good repair of pavement?
Again, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question, Mr. Sterling, but we'd be happy to take these kinds of comments directly to our legislative team to forward on to the committee for consideration.
I can answer it, but it's one of those loaded questions. The answer is 0. State of good repair. That means it all has to go to what your existing pavement is.
Maintenance. Yeah.
Let's go to number 2. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Meliav.
You and I are on the same page here. We just spent hours at FAMPO. The problem, well, first of all, when does it start? If it were to pass, when does it actually start?
2021 is the effective date.
Right. Okay. 2021. So we're going to have a discussion about something that will probably never actually might not ever actually happen. But because the ranking, the criteria, the ranking of individual projects, which was the cornerstone of the legislation, isn't established at all. All we know is that it will have a component for economic development, for congestion, for safety. It's not established. How we are ranked statewide and region-wide for this two different pots of money isn't there. So there is no way to answer any of these questions. That's why this conversation is useless. We do not know what this will mean for the area because we haven't seen that ranking, and we're not going to see it until April or May. The CTB will start playing with it then. So this is just a premature conversation. We just don't know.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Well, it may be premature, Mr. Milday, but you know what? This is an omnibus bill, and I mean, I do appreciate what you're saying, but I think that we as supervisors need to be aware of this bill, and our lobbyists kind of glossed over it, and maybe because it's so big that they couldn't get their arms around it. That may be part of it. But I think it was really important to bring this to the attention of our community.
Mr. Chair, I meant no disrespect.
Oh, okay.
I'm telling you that the money is allocated through a formula that has not been established yet. So it's impossible to analyze this yet. We do not know. We only know that those 30-40, the 30-30-40, that we don't know how that will get distributed amongst the region or the state. But I do know that I don't necessarily trust that we will. I think we might lose some control, but we don't know that. Out of FAMPO, more moving towards the state on how this money is allocated.
Mr. Sterling.
If you look at the way it's structured, I think number 2. Can you read number 2 again? Was that the one on state priorities?
As far as the second,
So so number one, 40% is going to
state of good repair.
State of good repair. So no new capacity improvements for, let's say, if we've got people stuck in traffic forever.
The second pot is district grant programs, and the last one is the high.
So the district grant, is that going to include like the matching funds, the 10%, et cetera? That incorporates all the enhancement. That includes the, why am I forgetting, the $10 million a year where we can put our money up. Yeah, the match revenue sharing. So that includes all that. And then the other 30% is?
Mr. Chairman, I talked with Marcy Parker today, and she said this does not affect revenue sharing.
So that won't be part of the 30%? That's not grant money in that case?
That is correct. Okay. This does not affect revenue sharing. It also doesn't affect what's called telefee, which is about slightly under $400,000 a year that we receive from the state.
Let's make sure we understand. If you can go back to Marcy, it doesn't affect it because in her mind, the 30% that allows 30% for grant money is still there, and that being one of those grant monies that they would see it. Let's get exactly what that grant money would be to the extent she knows. If the revenue sharing is then part of that 30%, that's what we're trying to determine. And then the last 30% is?
Again, the statewide high priority project.
So the state will decide what the high priority, and you districts, we don't care what you know about in your districts, we'll determine for you what your priorities are. Is that correct? That's kind of the way that's structured. That would be a normal person's interpretation.
I wouldn't argue with that interpretation. And just to build on Mr. Milday's suggestion that this is not yet fully fleshed out, I would suggest VACO has not even put out issue papers or recommendation on this bill. So it is complex and it is evolving, and there's not a whole lot of clarity as to how this might unfold.
That's probably the heart of the problem, is there's not a lot of clarity, there's not a lot of transparency that's taking place throughout this process, and it is going to have a significant impact. VACO may not ever put something out. The truth of the matter is, when you look at just that 40%, state of good repair, the truth, that actually helps the more urbanized communities, because they're not adding that much capacity, they're maintaining what they have. They're urbanized. They're not tearing down lots of buildings or adding those to do it. It affects more of the suburban or communities such as Stafford and many of the others, probably to a certain extent Prince William, but we get impacted by that by essentially not having as much access to that. When we're talking about congestion, if the idea, part of the metrics that were out there district by district is, is it economic development and is it going to be relieving congestion and other elements, that kind of sets that aside. That 40%, because it basically says this has got nothing to do with if you're going to improve the traffic flow. This is all about state of good repair. I'm not saying you'll let your roads turn into giant craters and potholes, but they are making a decision that 40% has got to go to that particular purpose, which means it's not available for what those other elements are. I don't know how they're going to ultimately implement this. I have grave reservations about how things have been taking place with, this administration in Richmond and the way that they've been doing things behind the closed doors and behind the scenes. It really makes me nervous that we'll be presented what those criteria and what that ranking system is, and we're going, damn, that really leaves us out in the cold. There'll be nothing we can do about it at that point in time. So, and probably nothing we can do about it at this point in time.
I think you just made the underlying point. There's absolutely nothing we can do about it. Asked Mr. Brewer to come in this evening to kind of brief us. He's just gotten most of this information. Is that correct? Today. So
we got the committee's report today. The bill did hit the committee on the 29th last Thursday. Subcommittee and committee passed out 17-3 at a full committee, and is now on the House floor. So yes, this is moving fairly quickly.
Okay. How much have you got more to share with us?
Not much that I think is of value. I'd be happy to continue with my brief, which offers a little bit more about the bill. But
I'd like you to go ahead and do that because, as Ms. Bumke said and others have said, the public needs to be aware of what's going on here, even though we don't have a lot of control over it.
Yes, sir. I'll continue. The revenue sharing program, as we just briefly discussed, I know our local folks say there's no effect. The committee report suggested that it makes minor modifications to the current structure. And it allows for project prioritization listing for the program to, number one, for projects that have previously received an allocation so as to complete backlog projects. It also prioritizes projects identified in the statewide plan or localities plan consistent with other recent actions to focus on priority needs. And lastly, under revenue sharing, it suggests that priority is given to pavement resurfacing and bridge rehabilitation projects. The bill also reallocates interest, dividends, and appreciation that currently accrue in the Transportation Trust Fund and Highway Maintenance Operating Fund to two pots. One is the creation of a Virginia Transportation Infrastructure Bank, allowing for a revolving loan fund to be created, and that gets 2/3 of that resource. 1/3 then goes to the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund, which is again the economic development fund that would be funded under this scenario. Other provisions allow for the CTB to make transfers to the toll facility revolving account, to the Virginia Transportation Infrastructure Bank, and lastly, the bill authorizes the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to enter into agreements not to exceed 20 years under the Public-Private Partnership Act to improve passenger rail service and private entities that finance improvements to return for annual payments. Again, I've tried to pick some highlights out of the 12-page bill. Happy to try to take any questions and have a further dialogue if you'd like to, Mr. Chairman.
And I believe, it's my understanding today from the conference call we had, the governor is in favor of this bill. Is that correct?
His administration, but in fairness, Chris Jones, the Republican chairman of appropriations, is championing this. It does appear to be a bipartisan effort at this point.
Right. Well, that's the point I was making.
And Chris Jones is out of where?
Suffolk.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
I have one more question on that bill, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Baruti, for bringing that and briefing the board on it, because it was beyond my capability. I don't know about Laura, but it's a complex House bill. And thank you to Mr. Sterling and Mr. Milday for their expertise on FAMPO. What about, how does it, if I could ask them, how does this bill affect toll roads? Are they looking to try to create toll roads throughout the whole state of Virginia? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Mr. Sterling.
Yeah, I have not gone through the entire bill and really done how this will or will not impact. I can talk to certain people I know about what their views are on how it would impact the ability to have toll roads, the necessitation of toll roads. One could argue, go back to that 40% argument, if the state funding has to be used for just maintenance, or so much of it has to be used for just maintenance, you could see where it would almost lead to a requirement for any new capacity to be of that nature. I can't say it will or won't. That would require much more in-depth knowledge or study of the issue. But I can tell you that so much of that going to maintenance reserved for just state of good repair, depending on how that gets interpreted, is of concern to me.
Thank you.
Is that it? Is there any other business to come before the board? That's saying we stand adjourned until February the 17th.